Hey guys. You are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see second part, what if Izuku lost his sight to unlock his quirk's power. Here is short summary. Midoriya Izuku is a boy different from all the rest. Point 1. He prefers learning over playing. Point 2. He barely shows his emotions. Point 3. His quirk is turning him blind. After a car crash results in the death of both his parents and renders him completely blind before he was supposed to be, Izuku's dream of heroism is cut short, or so everyone thinks. Left with a foster family who actually love him, a sister as sarcastic as he is in a powerful elemental quirk, Izuku must brave the world, and dangers lurking below society's light to fight for a place in heroism, and if, along the way, he discovers friends, a new family and love on the way, Izuku will handle it with a snappy wit, his powerful quirk and his sightless eyes. Whoever said a blind boy couldn't become a hero? Izuku doesn't need his sight to see. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Kyoka's eyes widened for a moment, her mouth falling open. That was not what she was expecting to hear from the kid who'd taken a liking to her brother. She needed a friend too. She was fine, she had Izuku, they didn't need, okay, she could kind of see what he meant. But was it really their fault? No one else would look past their quirks, or, more correctly, Izuku's eyes and Kyoka's willingness and eagerness to stick by his side. Her weak, mutant quirk didn't exactly help either. At school, Izuku was that one blind kid who wanted to be a hero, and Kyoka was his freak sister. They weren't bullied, not quite, but being ignored or whispered about in the halls where they could hear and do nothing about wasn't a fun experience. Teachers couldn't do a lot about that though, they couldn't punish kids for talking or having opinions. That had mostly stopped after Parents' Day, but the memories remained and both Kyoka and Izuku could do without them. Parents' Day was an event their school hosted every year where parents and guardians of the children got to come along and view the activities and lessons their kids took part in. It was usually meant to be a fun event in which classes turned into half-days so the afternoons could be used for fun and games. Children paired up with their parents and guardians to tackle sports day games and the like. There were prizes and trophies for both the class who had done the best or most and the student and their parents who'd won or earned the most amount of prizes. It was split up per year level and usually a very successful event, and usually 3 pro heroes didn't show up to watch over one of the children. Damn, that was a laugh, Kyoka thought to herself, hiding a grin that was bubbling up. She glanced at Monoma, who had been standing and waiting for her to answer. She sighed, running her hand through her hair. Neither Zu or I are used to having people who want to be friends with us just because, him especially. A lot of kids at school focus on either his quirk or his eyes and want to use him or make fun of him. That means they either push me aside or try to get Izuku to hate me. It never works cause he's my brother, but genuine friendship's something we aren't used to, so forgive me if I come off a little closed off and protective. It's nothing to be sorry for, I'd be the same way if I had a brother or sister, but seeing as I'm an only child, bullies can run scot-free and I didn't have anyone to stand up for me before Yui-chan showed up and recruited me to the drama club. Now people just avoid the two weird drama nerds. I get that, I don't think a lot of people would like a copy quirk. It got better for us after Parents' Day. Oh, yeah, it was hilarious. Let me tell you the story. School was as boring as ever, nothing much happening at all as our English teacher droned on and on about prefixes and suffixes. Izuku was fluent and myself almost so, thanks to friends. We have seats side by side so we can help each other out, only now we used it to pass messages in code back and forth. The teachers actually found it hilarious we had our own code and secret language. The deal was we could message each other, but we also had to pay attention to the lesson, and if we were caught we had to read the code out to the class. Anyway, the day was ending and we were in English class. We finished the lesson when the teacher stopped us from leaving and gave us an announcement and a piece of paper to hand to our parents. A lot of the kids were excited. Parents' Day happened every year. As most of you know, Parents' Day is next week. Hand these out to your parents and start preparing something special to show off to them. Class dismissed. Jiro, Midoriya, stay behind for a moment.
What's up, Teach? I asked after the rest of the class had filtered out of the room.
Since Midoriya is being fostered by your family, have you made arrangements on which parent will accompany which one of you? I don't, Mom. Dad and I will sort something out. We have an idea around this sort of thing. Though you might want to inform the class that heroes will be present for Parents' Day this year, I grinned.
The teacher stared at me for a second, before sighing.
Yeah, that's valid. You Jiros haven't stopped messing with this school since your parents attended our halls. Just to let you know, sir, I claim plausible deniability, Izuku spoke up bluntly. The teacher sighed again, grimacing.
I thought you might. Your purple gremlin sister's more likely to cause trouble without telling you than she is to tell you about her plans. This is exactly how Mika found Kyotoko, he groaned.
Don't worry, sir. Kyo-chan and I are way too gay to ever fall for each other, Izuku replied without a pause or change in expression. Of course you are, the teacher accepted plainly.
Is that all, sir? I asked. He nodded, his face pained.
Yes, but please don't cause too much of a fuss at Parents' Day, please. Don't worry, sir, we won't. We left the classroom to quiet grumblings and wishes for alcohol, and I was happy. I knew Parents' Day was going to be brilliant. A week passed by quickly enough and both Izuku and I were ready to show our stuff.
We entered the classroom on the awaited day and it was like a buzz of fun and excitement had taken over the school. Part of that was the event itself was popular with the kids, but another part of that was the rumor of heroes attending Parents' Day.
Mom and Dad came in with us and joined the rest of the parents of the kids who were in class already. One of the boys nudged Izuku a little too roughly in the side. Hey, sightless. Where are your set of freaks? He sniggered. Sightless is one of Izuku's stupid bully's nicknames for him. Seeing as it's a parody of Toothless, it doesn't bother us too much. They'll be here soon. Uncle, Zashi and Uncle Sho just need to pick up Aunt Emmy. They'll be here before first bell, Izuku replied calmly. Teehee boy backed off inhumanely quickly and we both knew why. Izuku's composure during times when people aren't exactly composed scared the scrap out of everyone at school, not just our year. As the time kept ticking ever closer to the start of the school day, more of our classmates and their parents arrived until everyone was present. The doors to the classroom were closed with a minute to first bell, when the doors slid open with a bang and Fukukado Emmy strolled in, wearing her full Ms. Joke hero uniform. She was followed by Hizashi, dressed to the nines in his hero persona, present Mike, and Shota, in his scarf and jumpsuit, his hideous yellow goggles hanging around his neck. Everyone stared. Ever so slowly, Izuku turned around to look at me and with the straightest face he could muster, said, I told you they'd make a dramatic entrance, jokey and presentation Michelangelo just can't resist. Yeah, I know, 3,000 yen, I sighed. Silence reigned until the class lost it. What?
You know pro heroes. Oh my gosh, that's Present Mike.
They know the voice hero, the smile hero and, some guy who looks homeless. I think I heard a rumor about an underground hero who runs around and looks like he's homeless, that him. Wow, Zuku. Do you have to tease me about my hero name too? These two are already bad enough, Hizashi whined playfully.
If you didn't want me to, you should have come in incognito mode, Izuku snorted humorless ly.
I told them this would be a bad idea, but of course they wouldn't listen. Uncle Sho, it's these two. Izuku finished the hero's sentence.
Ah, you know you love us, Zuzu. Emmy pounced on Izuku, cuddling him and ruffling his hair. Izuku sighed and waited for the woman to get off of him, before turning to the front of the class.
We're in school, Uncle Mike, Aunt Joke. Behave yourselves otherwise I'll hide the karaoke machine and Dad joke book from you, he threatened.
The two heroes fell silent in an instant while everyone except Aizawa, used to their antics, sweat dropped at the randomness of the working threats.
The second bell rang soon after and Parents' Day officially began. And that's the story of how Izuku and I scared our school into never bothering us outright again, Kyoka said with a chuckle. Monoma shook his head in exasperated fondness. His two new friends either hated everyone and loved to torment them.
They were an interesting family, he thought, no one was left out or alone.
Izuku was treated as a son and a brother, and Monoma doubted he'd find better people to foster his friend. Kyoka was a good sister, too. He hoped she'd allow their friendship to grow. Oh, no doubt they'd be at each other's throats every chance they could get, but that was the beauty of friendship.
Wonderful, Monoma said as he realized Kyoka had been waiting for him to speak. I do believe we'll all get along smoothly, then.
What do you mean, get along? As far as I'm concerned, I can protect Zu myself. I'm his best friend, his first friend, got it? And I shall be his second. Besides, don't you think that calls for him to make, not you? Monoma replied smugly. Kyoka gritted her teeth and growled through them, letting Monoma know he'd won that battle. Fine, but you better protect my brother, or so help me I'll gut you, then skin you, then burn you alive. Kyoka threatened him loudly. Monoma snorted in amusement at her words, promising her that, yes, he was planning on protecting Izuku, and no, he had no ulterior motives around the boy, yet.
And finally, after all their talking and yelling, agreeing and disagreeing, death threats and friendships formed, Kyoka and Monoma. Nito, he was Nito, now. Kyoka and Nito smirked at each other, Nito holding out a hand and Kyoka taking it.
They shook, once, twice, before solemnly vowing to forever protect Izuku and stick by him no matter what happened, not knowing all of the crazy events that would surround the trio. They were oblivious to the friendships that would arise in the coming years, of the elements that were still to find wielders, and that, even as Izuku looked into the core of the earth, reading its memories to learn and protect, that the person he found so curious, the person he was always watching and studying, well, she was watching back. Don't ask me how, don't ask me why, but his role model, aware of his presence and actions, aware of his situation and ability, was planning to help him become the best earthbender he could be. And if Toph was having just a little bit of fun confusing her friends over the continuous drills she'd run through, dissecting her weaknesses and fighting style, there wasn't anyone who could prove it. And after all of that, after everything that was going on upstairs in Izuku's room, unbeknownst to him, the two came down, grinning like maniacs. All right, what did you two gremlins do? He asked with a sigh that dreaded their answer. We talked, Kyoka began. And we discussed, Nato took over. And we decided, Kyoka finished. We shall be watching over you as we please, and you can't do anything to stop it, they chanted together, gleefully watching as concealed horror took over Izuku's expression. Hear, hear, cried two voices from the living room. Izuku almost groaned. What was going on now? Couldn't anything be normal?
Author, we need to talk, Izuku muttered, turning away from his friends.
No breaking the fourth wall, it's expensive and you're not the one paying for it. Then sort out this mess and we'll be good, got it? Good, Izuku muttered. He turned back towards Nato and Kyoka, who wore puzzled expressions on their faces. Izuku met them with a cool, blank stare. I don't know what that was, I don't want to know, but good job, Kyoka snorted, shaking her head. You saw nothing you can prove, Izuku intoned far too robotically to sound innocent.
Sure pal, whatever you would have us believe, Nito laughed, patting Izuku on the back.
Soon after, Mika pooped her head around the doorframe, smiling at the three kids. Nato-kun, your parents told us they'd pick you up in a few hours. They had some shopping to get done, but if you would like, Kyo's and Izukun's aunt and uncles are here if you'd like to meet them, she said.
Izuku lit up as much as he really could, which was the equivalent of wide eyes and an almost vibrating body.
Kyoka grinned as she heard the news. Uncle Shota, Uncle Hizashi and Aunt Emmy were a ton of fun, and she hadn't seen them since last month's Parents' Day fiasco outside of Izuku's supervised practices and training sessions. Nato nodded, almost mystified at the responses from his two new friends, and he wondered who they were that they would cause such a reaction.
Of course Kyoka told him about Present Mike, but he thought that was a joke.
There was no way the present Mike would show up for a school event of a child that wasn't his own. Nato didn't think heroes did that for their kids. They were always too busy or too tired or too late to care much about what their child or children were up to, weren't they?
There was a kid at his school who was a real rich asshole, and he bragged about his parents' meeting endeavor to discuss a certain case the kid's father was involved in.
The two got to talking, wondering how they were doing and what was new in their lives. The mood grew somber, the boy had said, and the conversation simply ended there.
The boy had said Endeavor looked almost heartbroken, so maybe something happened to the hero's eldest, Todoroki Shoto. That had to be it, but why would there be news about a kid not even ready for hero school, or high school?
Do you want to meet them? Izuku asked quietly, carefully dragging Nato out of his thoughts. If you insist. I didn't, I asked because you hadn't responded. Then I shall gladly accompany you, Midoriya Izuku.
Just Izuku, please. We're friends now. Don't you think friends should be on a first-name basis? Nito smiled softly down at the quiet young boy who he couldn't seem to take his eyes off of. Then I am Nito. It's a pleasure to be in your wondrous company, Nito replied with a beaming smile. So are you coming? Mika asked, and the two boys suddenly realized she'd been present for their entire conversation.
Kyoka had been too, mother and daughter smirking at them as if saying, I know something you don't. Yes, Auntie, we're right behind you, Izuku told her blandly, his blank face and monotone voice sending the purple-haired mother and daughter pair into giggles. Izuku took Nito's hand in his own and Mika and Kyoka led the way to the lounge area, where two men and a woman sat on plush couches in an armchair, smiling and talking to Kiyotako and each other until they entered. Nito's mouth fell open even as the three heroes' eyes lit up at the sight. Yes, even Aizawa's, but the grumpy hero played it as cool as he always did. Izuku. Izu-chan. Baby Zuzu, the three heroes exclaimed.
Nito slowly picked his jaw up off the ground and turned to glare at Kyoka, who wasn't hiding her smug smirk in the slightest, and Izuku.
You didn't tell me you were related to three pro heroes? Kyoka raised a hand. Don't even start, I thought you were joking, he grumbled.
No, Nito, meet my uncles Shota and Hizashi and Aunt Emmy. You know Present Mike's real name, came the soft, disbelieving reply.
Zoo just has that effect on people, Kyoka grinned, slinging an arm around his neck. Hey, don't ignore us, Emmy whined, the smile hero hiding a grin as Izuku rolled his eyes almost affectionately.
Believe me, Aunt Emmy, you are the least ignorable person in this room, Izuku said blandly, taking a page out of Aizawa's book.
Ah, you do care, baby Zuzu, she replied cheekily. Nato gives Izuku a look at the nickname, one that Izuku ignores completely.
He isn't sure where that name originated from, but he is sure he never wants to know, not if he wanted to keep his sanity intact.
How are you, Izuku? We haven't been able to keep you company during training sessions as often as before, but our new positions keep us fairly busy, Aizawa interjected after a quick hello. We've been good, actually, I might need some new kind of help, Izuku glanced at Nato before dragging Hizashi away from the group. Whoa there, listener, what's up? Hizashi asked with a chuckle.
I made a friend, but I don't know how to friend. Izuku told him seriously.
Hizashi stared at the boy before him incredulously. Laughter bubbled to his lips unbidden and Izuku spent at least 2 minutes glaring at the blonde voice hero before the man calmed down enough to hold a proper conversation. Sorry, Izu, that was mean, Hizashi giggled, ruffling the blind boy's hair. You're fine, Izuku sighed, but seriously, I don't know how to friend. You mean be a friend, right? Because friending isn't a thing, buddy.
Just tell me how to do it, Izuku grumbled. Just be yourself, Izu.
That's it? Well, sure, there's things like communication and listening to each other. You know what? Act like you plan to marry them in the future and treat them like you would treat your future girlfriend, was the hero's advice.
Izuku eyed Hizashi down as if he was the dumbest person on earth. Uncle Zashi, you know very well I'm as gay as you are for Uncle Sho, so that's future husband, and I doubt Nito would appreciate that. I act like I'm a mini Uncle Shota, Izuku sighed. You know what? Thanks for trying, Uncle Sho. Uncle Zashi's being useless, can you be of some help? He called back into the room. He ignored the snorts of amusement emanating from the lounge as well as his uncle Zashi's pouting as the two heroes swapped places. Let me guess. Friendship's weird and you want to try it? The underground hero asked blandly. Izuku nodded with a sigh of relief. I should have gone to you in the first place. Yeah kid. Now, listen. Hizashi would have told you to be yourself. Don't listen to him, he's an idiot. Hey. Go away, you morons, Aizawa and Izuku called back.
Once they heard shuffling and muted voices of disappointment did they continue. Look kid. Friends are a weird breed of human in which the extroverts adopt introverts and drag them into little cliques no one else understands, like how Kyoka took you in, Monoma's doing the same. The most you can do is just let them do whatever, it's easier than fighting whatever plans they spontaneously made last second, Aizawa told him with a sigh. Is sitting in a corner and reading even a choice? Izuku asked wearily.
Trust me Izuku, not even a choice, I know, Hizashi did that to me, never left me alone for a minute and ended up getting me into more trouble than I care to admit.
What a pain. Absolutely, but there's nothing you can do about it. Resistance is futile, Izuku. Repeat after me. I will not have a choice in the matter. I will not have a choice in the matter, again. I will not have a, Shota, what are you teaching the listener? Hizashi screeched, throwing open the door to the room Izuku and Aizawa had taken for his consultation on the matters of friendship.
With the blandest, most deadpan look on his face he could muster, Izuku turned towards the blonde cockatoo and said, I do not have a choice in the matter. Aizawa, with an expression eerily similar to Izuku's, raised a hand slowly and, in full view of Hizashi, pet Izuku's hair. Good job Izuku, you're doing well. Shota, the blonde squawked loudly, a scandalized expression taking over his usually grinning face. That's how I learned friendship, Aizawa shrugged, unbothered.
That's not how it works and you know it. Hizashi glared playfully at his husband. They were married now, Izuku forgot about that little detail. He stalked back to the group in the living room which consisted of Emi, Kyoka and Nato, who seemed to still be trying to figure out the past 5 minutes, and Mika and Kiyotako.
Guys, I have figured out friendship, Izuku declared without a change in expression.
Kyoka snorted while Mika and Kiyotako held back smiles. Poor Nato looked as if he wasn't sure whether Izuku was serious or joking. When he switched his confused expression for one of fond bemusement, Izuku guessed he thought Izuku was serious.
And he was. Well, what did you find out? Asked a smiling Mika. She must be thinking Izuku was joking. I do not have a choice in the matter. I have been adopted by extroverts and resistance is futile, he recited proudly.
Now, keep in mind, Izuku was a blind child with only so many role models towards how one should act, and Aizawa Shota, an underground hero who loved his logical ruses, was one of them. There wasn't really anyone to blame for Izuku's thoughts as they were, even as Kyoka reeled with laughter, as did Emi and Nato, and the only other adults shook their heads with fond sighs. It did give Izuku the impression that that was not how friendships worked, but oh well, that's what he had to work with. Shota's corrupting our baby, Hizashi complained as he and his husband returned to the living room.
He can't corrupt me if I was like this to begin with, Izuku replied with a slightly off version of Aizawa's own terrifying smile.
Stifled laughter filled the air at Izuku's comments, which did little to appease the distraught voice hero. See? Hizashi yelled out, pointing at Izuku, who hid a snigger behind a blank, questioning look. It wasn't as if it really mattered in the long run anyway, but it was fun messing with the heroes, even if it wasn't always appreciated. As hilarious as this is, you two, can we please get on with why you visited to begin with? Mika asked with a giggle, Kiyotako rolling his eyes with a fond smile plastering across his face. Kiyotako and Mika always knew their relationship was odd, especially in sight of all the pranks they'd pulled on their old teachers. Sure, they weren't exactly boring, but their ideas weren't always great. Ah yes, there was a reason we came here, Hizashi nodded sagely.
You don't know either, Zashi, Aizawa sighed exasperatedly.
Were you told? I didn't have to be, it's obvious, my oblivious love.
Then why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't my place to tell. Emi, Aizawa turned to raise an eyebrow at the heroine, who cleared her throat and stood with a grin. I'm expecting. Aizawa face-palmed as the group collectively lost it.
What? Fu Kukado Emi, you didn't tell me, Hizashi exclaimed, equal parts excited and upset, losing control of his quirk in the process. Aizawa flashed his own quirk and a glare at his husband, then turned on his friend. Really? Yup. No way, Kyoka squealed. Congrats Emi, but I didn't know you were married, Kiyotako smiled warmly at her.
Mika sighed, already done with the heroine's antics.
She's not, love, Emi's being dramatic. Why don't you tell them what you really mean, Emi? The woman leveled her own glare on Emi, who just laughed it off. I jest, joking, you funny bones, she laughed. Emi, tell them or I will. Aizawa sighed, rubbing tired eyes.
All right, fine, grumpy pants, she rolled her eyes and giggled, before straightening up a little. What's actually happening is I'm planning on adopting. The request's gone through and it's pending review, but it looks good, she said. I was planning on informing them soon, but I wanted to tell you all, first. Izuku stared at her for a moment, before a burst of happy cries took over the room, although Nito was a silent witness.
His Aunt Emi, whom he'd grown to adore in ways he never showed, was adopting, but if she was telling them all together, it wasn't him. Feelings welled up inside him that he couldn't name, and while everyone else was happy and celebrated, he couldn't bring himself to congratulate his aunt.
A blank look fell over him and it was like he'd taken a step back, away from the noise and activity, just a silent witness, Nito by his side.
Are you all right, my friend? The blonde copycat asked quietly.
I'll be okay. This is just hard for me, Izuku whispered back.
Zu? Is something wrong? Kyoka called out. Izuku shook his head silently.
Everything's okay. He turned to Emi. I'm happy, congratulations.
Damn it, Emi, if you keep this up I swear. Stop looking so upset baby Zuzu. I have an important question for you. The smile hero giggled at the confused expression on everyone's face, except Aizawa, who wrestled the information from Emi before their visit. The tired hero sighed. Why were his friends such headaches? Well, this would be good for Izuku either way, he just hoped the kid wouldn't be too put off by Emi's game.
Emi was a good hero, a funny one, even if her jokes made him want to dig himself a grave and be buried alive and he'd sooner pull his teeth out than admit it, but she could get carried away at the worst of times, those times being ones where seriousness was required.
Aizawa glanced over the room's occupants, most of them looking excited and confused, but also slightly shocked at the shenanigans his friends were causing with Izuku.
The boy was almost a miniature version of himself, with a few differences. He was honestly blunt and didn't, more like couldn't, hide things from his friends and family. He wasn't very expressive, but his thoughts were made apparent even if he didn't want them to be.
He could be cryptic when he wanted to be, but that was really only when playing games with Zashi and Emi. Even now, Aizawa could see the confusion and suspicion building behind what was going to be a very expertly done blank face.
To be perfectly blunt, Izuku interrupted, what is going on here?
Problem hero over there. Aizawa shot a glare over to the grinning, giggling Emi, who smiled and waved at Izuku, wants to ask.
I wanted to ask if I could adopt you, Izuku, as my son and not as a nephew. Emi took over for Aizawa, her voice uncharacteristically soft and her face serious.
Izuku stilled, the entire room falling eerily silent, waiting for the blind boy's decision. Izuku said nothing, did nothing, could hear nothing, everything was moving too fast, but too slow at the same time, and he ran from the room, too blinded by his own thoughts to hear the commotion he generated from the room he left.
Shouts and yells echoed behind him, but it was like Izuku could hear none of it, and as soon as they realized his reactions, he was gone.
Almost instantly, Aizawa turned one of his best glares on Emi, who wilted a little.
There were so many ways to handle that, Emi, but you played it off as a joke. The one thing this kid's wanted more than anything is a family, and you blew it off as one of your games. We all know Izuku adores you as more than an aunt. All you had to do was ask him kindly, gently, and he would have said yes. Aizawa glared at her, making the hero wilt more and more with every word.
You need to calm down. Emi made a mistake, but she can fix it. All we have to do is find Izu, find out why he reacted like that, then make it right. That's all we can do, and all we can hope for, Hisashi said, laying a gentle hand on his husband's shoulder. Aizawa sank into the touch with a soft sigh. You better be right, Zashi, because if you aren't, I don't know what I'll do. I didn't mean to scare him off, I thought he'd like it, Emi mumbled, for once not smiling. Emi's quirk required her to be funny, to get people to laugh. Jokes were the best way to do that. Her entire hero persona revolved around her being unpredictable and silly, which is why she fought with joke cream pies and weighted rubber animals. Though, it really didn't help when she smacked a villain with a rubber pig and it snorted loudly. She found it hilarious, which meant villains laughed and were subsequently captured. Over the years, her hero persona and everyday persona merged, it seemed, and she made serious situations out into jokes to lighten the air. This was probably a bad idea now, but it was all she really knew. She would try, though. She'd try for Izuku, the boy who had nothing, yet dealt with everything, the boy she'd come to love as a son. She wanted to adopt him, and if that meant getting a little serious? Nothing was going to stop her. Izuku ran. He ran and ran and ran and didn't stop until his lungs were bursting and his legs were shaking and he just couldn't run anymore. He'd left the house and his friends and the adults behind, not focusing on the scenery that made its way through his senses and just running.
Out of the front door and down the streets, his mind was in turmoil every step he took. It wasn't until he stopped, that he was gasping for breath and almost collapsing, did he think to survey his surroundings.
There was never, usually, anyone better at directions and navigation as Midoriya Izuku was, thanks to his quirk, but now, for the first time ever, Midoriya Izuku was hopelessly lost. There was nothing remotely familiar around him. Street names, places, heck, even the roads and streets looked unfamiliar. Thankfully, he was never one to panic, although on the other hand, he'd left his phone at home in his sudden haste to leave. Oh. Right, he left. Izuku moved out of the streets and began walking, sifting through his thoughts in a much more calm, much more collected manner. Aunt Emmy asked to adopt him. She wanted him, but she made fun of every minute of the reveal, as he started to call it.
She didn't take it seriously. She thought it was a joke. Was he a joke? Was that all she thought of him? Why was she really? Where was that music coming from?
Izuku felt himself drawn to lively, upbeat music filling the streets, so he followed the sound, not exactly knowing what to expect, but not exactly caring, with the day he was currently having. The music led him to what he saw as a partially run-down dance studio. Paint was old and peeling, the out-front sign was battered and on its last legs, and the structure of the building itself didn't seem to be very stable, but the music was perfect for a spin-out on the dance floor, Izuku thought. He erased his presence, just like Uncle Sho had taught him, and entered the building as quietly as he knew how. The entrance and inside of the place were in almost the same conditions as the outside, with only a slight difference. The wooden floors were polished and wiped, the floor-to-ceiling mirror shone with not a speck of dirt, and the bar, while not perfect, still gleamed with care. On the far back wall was an instruments rack, and Izuku could feel himself almost smiling at the sight of it. He could feel the vibrations from the music player set on the floor and the light, fast steps from people. 2 adults and 5 kids, it seemed, Izuku thought as he stood just beside the doorway, hidden from sight. They were loud, laughing and cheering, booing and taunting as the adults watched, and he wondered what was happening. He didn't want to be caught, but the instruments caught his eyes as he was about to leave them to their devices. They had several guitars, acoustic and electric, and a bass, a set of drums in the corner, and a keyboard.
There were a few other classical instruments, and they were taunting him. He could swear they were. Izuku took another peek at the people, but they were busy doing what they were, and he was cloaked, so it wasn't like they'd catch him. He could chance it, right? Yeah, he'd be fine. Izuku grit his teeth, then caved. He wanted a closer look at the instruments, damn it.
He stepped quickly and lightly, hiding his footsteps amongst the footsteps of the strangers and their music, until he'd reached the instruments' corner. They really were beautiful, all clean and maintained well. The strings were tuned and the keyboard was covered with a dust cover, the drums too. He checked on the people again, to make sure he was still safe, then crouched down so he was more or less face to face with the instruments, and ran a hand down one of the acoustic guitars. That was when the music switched off and he froze, hoping he hadn't been caught. He checked on the people again, praying they hadn't noticed him, but both adults and all 5 kids were staring right at him. Damn, Izuku knew he wasn't exactly the tallest 10-year-old around, but did they have to tower over him like that? Hello there? One of the kids said, almost questioningly. Izuku booked it. Hey, wait, they called after him.
From what he'd seen, the adults were both men, both tall, but the taller man on the right had been burly with muscle while the other was slimmer, just as muscular, though. He had messy hair, not long, but not short, either, that sat flat and flopped on his head.
The burly man had very short hair, cropped close to his head, and just his luck, both decided to chase after him. Out of the kids he'd seen, 3 were boys and 2 girls, and again, just his luck, all 5 were taller, probably older, too, and knew this part of town and the streets far better than he did. The high-speed chase didn't even last 5 minutes before he was cornered, so Izuku made the brilliant choice of exploiting Uncle Sho's parkour lessons and dashed to the rooftops. He thanks the Lord above for the sensory part of his quirk on the unknown parts of town. He knew he was still in Musutafu, and his decision must have been a good one, if the cries and curses of annoyance from below were anything to go by. Of course, the good times could never last, as the 2 adults told the kids to wait below, and, of course, they could parkour as well. Them not being able to was too easy apparently. Dang it, he'd almost gotten away with it too, Izuku thought as the burly one snatched him up by the scruff of his t-shirt. He gave a yelp as the sudden tugging sensation and, dangling in the air, he could only barely make out the man holding him, face to face.
"Did you catch him, Kagaya?" the other adult asked, catching up to the burly man who held him in the air.
"What does it look like, Kisei?" The burly man, Kagaya, snorted. Now, they turned their attention back to him. "We have some questions for you." "I'll bet you do," Izuku muttered quietly. Not quietly enough, it seemed, when Kisei, the long-haired man, chuckled. "We have a mouthy one, Kagaya," he laughed. The pair left the rooftops, only after Kagaya had slung Izuku over his shoulder like a sack of rice. It was a very disgruntled Izuku, a sniggering Kisei, and a grumpy-looking Kagaya that rejoined the 5 kids on the ground. "You caught him. Way to go, guys. Does he speak?" "Don't be an idiot, of course he does, right? Hey, do you? And what's your name, and—"
All right, kids, tone it down. Let's get back to base and we can interrogate him there, got it? Leave him be to sort things out. Till them, you gremlins, Kagaya ordered gruffly.
The kids whined, then agreed so quickly Izuku's head started to spin and he wondered what the heck he'd just gotten himself into. For that matter, Izuku groaned. "Thanks to you lot, I now owe Uncle Sho 50 push-ups, great," he grumbled. From the group's collective sniggering, there was no sympathy to be found there. They made it back to the run-down old building in a matter of minutes, and Izuku was deposited on the floor inside, surrounded by the 5 kids, both adults on either end of the little semicircle to stop him from running off again. "All right. Talk, kid. What the hell were you doing near our instruments?" Kagaya questioned, and, gruff and tough, must have been the man's motto. It was like Izuku really was in an interrogation. "Smashing them, duh," Izuku replied, hiding a smirk.
"Do you have a name, kid?" Kisei asked next. "Sure I do. I'm nobody," he continued his game, fighting down the smirk he so badly wanted to release. "So we were chasing no, oh. Sneaky kid," he heard one of the boys laugh.
"How does a squirt like him even know Greek mythology anyway?" one of the 2 girls groaned. "It's called a library. Ever heard of it? They're everywhere, and free," he snarked back. "Might want to search it up sometime." "There's that mouth of his. Are we ever going to get straight answers?" Kisei gave him a strange look, a smile crossing his face.
"I don't. Izuku, Izu, where are you?" cried a voice outside, joined by several more. "Zu, come on, where are you? Are we even sure he's here? He can't have gotten so far." "Yeah, not unless he was freaked out and unable to think properly," the voice huffed a laugh.
All eyes turned to the direction the outside was, and Izuku flinched.
The 7 turned back to him, some curious, some grinning slyly and some smiling sympathetically.
"Crap," Izuku muttered, hunching in on himself at the hungry gazes set on him. "Haruna, go get those people, please. I think we just found their runaway," Kisei ordered with a smile. One of the girls saluted cheekily and shot off while the rest eyed him like hungry predators. Not 10 minutes later, 2 frantic children and 2 frantic adults rushed inside, the children tackling Izuku. "Zu! Izuku!" they cried. "Hey Kyo-chan, Nato, sorry for running off," Izuku mumbled reluctantly. "I'll say, you scared us, Izu-kun," Mika cried, enveloping him in a tight hug after Nato and Kyoka were done with him.
"Gotta say, Izuku, didn't think you could run so far," Cutico laughed, ruffling his hair affectionately.
I'll say, Brat really made us work, Kagaya muttered loud enough for all of them to hear. What did you do, Izuku? Mika and Kyoka asked with matching sighs. I only wanted to look at the instruments, he blurted out calmly. Did you ask if you could? Mika gave him a stern look.
No, Izuku replied sheepishly, turning his head to avoid her disappointed expression.
Our music was kind of loud, admitted one of the kids with a grin.
Thank you for finding him, it must have been a bother. Sorry for the intrusion, please accept our apologies, Cutico said as he and Mika, Nito and Kyoka bowed for Izuku. It's all okay. Don't worry about it, Kisei laughed, he'll be welcome back again anytime, as long as he doesn't sneak in, next time. That's very kind of you, we'll make sure he's supervised next time, right, Izuku? Mika glared at Izuku.
How many times do you expect me to run off after this? It was a one-time thing and you know it. I don't want to hear any jokes about this in the future, either, Kyo-chan. Izuku got to his feet, his calm, blank face back in place.
We should be going, then, we need to talk, Izuku.
See you soon, Izuku. One of the boys grinned. Don't run off on us again, please.
No flaking on us either. You better be here next week, too. The kids called. Izuku's eyebrows crinkled in a sign of confusion, but before he could ask why they wanted him back, Nito and Kyoka had dragged him out of the building and away from the unknown people.
Izuku held in a sigh as, inevitably, he sensed motion behind them. One look at Mika. Kyoka and Nito confirmed that they knew nothing about their little stalkers despite Mika's and Kyoka's enhanced hearing. I don't know if you noticed, but we have some tag-alongs, he spoke up suddenly. By the way the 5 kids behind them jumped, they had been within hearing range. Mika, Cutico and Kyoka stared at him, shocked, then whirled around in surprise while Nito sniggered with a lazy grin spreading over his face. Of course we have some fans, we are remarkable, on stage and off, the blonde preened. Izuku merely sighed, tapping his foot as their stalkers revealed themselves sheepishly. It wasn't long that Kisei and Kagaya caught up, either, and didn't bother hiding their displeasure at their ward's antics. If you wanted to come with us, all you had to do was ask, Izuku broke the silence. We had no way of knowing if you really would come back, so we wanted to see where you lived and drag you back if you didn't show yourself within a week or two, one of the boys muttered, he and the other children flushing red at the admittance. Mika and Cutico giggled and Nito and Kyoka snorted with amusement.
Izuku had trouble hiding his irritation. Why don't we give Kisei and Kagaya his number instead? Mika asked, smiling.
Aunt Mika, no, Izuku hissed. He really didn't want anything to do with these people, not really after the day he'd had. He felt a gentle hand rest carefully on his arm and he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose with one hand while the other rested on his hip. I'm heading home to calm down, there's no guarantee I won't throw a hissy fit otherwise, Izuku mumbled, stalking off by himself. He didn't know the way home exactly, but he had learnt a fun little trick from exploring the nature of his quirk. Fun fact: the sensory aspect wasn't limited to only his sight. It worked on all of his senses. He could turn them on and off as he pleased, now that he had his connection with the earth, but his sight sense was pretty much dead and his touch sense was almost always on. His other senses not so much, his smell and taste were nuisances and almost always off, only on the most basic human level. When they were fully on, though, he was better than a dog bred for tracking scents. Kyoka liked to joke how he was basically a puppy himself, at that point, but if it helped him get back to his friends and family. He didn't much care what he was called. Izuku paused in his tracks and took a deep breath in, held it, then let it out. He breathed in deeply through his nose and suddenly, every scent and smell around him flushed into him. Izuku flinched at the influx of everything, wrinkling his nose at them all, before toning down the strength of his quirk to a manageable place. He breathed in again, tracking through everything he smelled until he hit the faint, lingering sense of Aunt Mika's perfume, Uncle Cutico's cologne and Kyoka's and Nito's emotions. Yes, he knew that sounded weird, but with senses on par with an animal's, Izuku thought it would be weirder to not be able to sense the emotions of a human, even if he didn't exactly have those emotions. He took a deep breath again and followed the traces of the scents he knew well, What a day, he sighed to himself quietly as he walked. He hadn't meant to run off. The shock of Aunt Emmy's proposal and the way she said it, as if it were a big joke, that she was taking him in on a whim, it made something in him break.
He couldn't handle teasing from the adult he, which he would never say out loud, loved hanging with the most, through all of her terrible jokes. He hated that he ran, now, but how could he face his aunt like this?
He sighed again and kept walking, taking another deep breath. He knew the scents he was following would get stronger as he got closer to home, but he wished he had one of his instruments with him. Kyoka's suggestion of playing out his emotions had really helped, and he did so every time he felt overwhelmed or afraid. It was great practice for his instruments, too.
He enjoyed playing his flute and violin the most of his instruments, but playing the piano was fun for him, too.
He preferred acoustic guitars over electrical and classical instruments over the more modern ones. He was different from Kyoka in that way. He knew she loved playing more modern instruments, electrical guitars, drums, bass, over the classics. She could play them, just like he could play the modern instruments, but they had their preferences. As he walked home, he thought about everything that had happened in his life so far, and wondered if Katsuki, Kachan, Bakugo even remembered him.
It had been a while since they had last seen each other, but the 5 years they'd spent together had to have meant something to the fiery blonde, right? Izuku knew he'd loved playing with the other boy when they were young, and he knew the other boy loved playing with him, too, but when Katsuki's quirk came in, the boy's already confident self swelled up and his confidence had started to turn into arrogance.
Ever since then, because the other kids had followed Katsuki's lead, they started picking more and more on him, because his quirk hadn't come in, and when it had, they'd all been told Izuku would lose his sight, but even then he found ways to surpass the other kids. He became practically untouchable after he started his classes, and no one could deny the skills he'd started to pick up. That made it harder and harder for the other kids and Katsuki to pick on him, especially since he was the poor dear losing his eyes, and such a fragile little boy, that they had to be careful when playing with our friend Midoriya-kun, otherwise they'd get into trouble. And then the accident happened and he moved in with the gyrus. That was the last time he saw Katsuki, really and truly.
He couldn't see anything at all, for one, but also, even when he was in the hospital, even if Aunt Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru stopped by frequently, Katsuki never once came by, and they hadn't crossed paths in the 5 years he spent with the Joris otherwise.
It made caring about the other a whole lot harder.
Izuku was sure they weren't really friends anymore, and they hadn't been since Katsuki got his quirk, but he and Katsuki had practically been raised together, side by side until his 5th birthday, so he couldn't just stop caring about the blonde. Izuku's feelings and emotions may have been dampened, but Katsuki would never be removed from his heart.
Izuku's thoughts wandered from Katsuki to the other kids at his daycare, the ones who'd always proclaimed they'd become heroes, but were boastful, arrogant, and picked on him as their favorite pastime. He hadn't seen them in years, either, but he wondered if he would, when he got into hero school. This might have sounded strange to anyone else, but Izuku wasn't sure if he really, truly wanted to go to UA. It was a good school, sure, best of the best, but despite the strength of his quirk and the effort he put in to train it, he wasn't sure if being a spotlight hero was for him.
He knew all about UA, of course he'd research it, and he found almost all of their graduates went into spotlight heroics, with only 1 or 2 going twilight or underground per heroics classes. It had the most public events, sports festival, cultural festival, and by the time the licensing exam came around, pretty much everyone else taking the exam knew their quirks.
That wasn't a bad thing per se, especially since heroes had to be prepared to take on villains who knew their quirks in the industry they'd committed themselves to, but it made things that much harder. Despite all those negative points, just having UA as a place of attendance did wonders for future employment and admittance into higher education. It also helped that, besides the hero course, UA's other divisions, support, business, general education, were the best of the best, even if the school was most known for its heroics courses. He knew his sister wanted to go there, regardless of if she got into the hero course or not. It wasn't so cut and dried with him, though. He loved all parts of the industry, support, business, and the heroes themselves, and even if he wanted to be a hero, competition for the school itself was insane. It wasn't as if other hero schools were less competitive or as intensive as UA, but a lot of them were lesser known because of the many, many top heroes who graduated from UA. All Might and Endeavor were both included in that number. The other schools were probably just as good as UA, but because the number of heroes and All Might himself graduated from the famous hero school, it rose to the top of hero schools in the east, along with Shiketsu in the west. They were the best, so why did he feel so apprehensive about them? He knew Uncle Sho and Uncle Zashi took up teaching positions there, and Emi had gone to a hero school called Ketsubutsu to teach there. He had no clue what she taught, she wouldn't tell him, but he knew she taught there. He was nervous, to say the least, about his looming conversation with his aunt. He knew she didn't mean to treat it like a joke. That was just her personality, and he shouldn't have run out on them. He panicked, but still, the thought lingered. What if Aunt Emi really didn't want to adopt him after all? He knew he liked to play at acting like his Uncle Sho and not react to her silliness. He enjoyed their games and teasing, it was just how they communicated. Yes, he'd admit he felt closer to her than Uncle Sho and Uncle Zashi, and he had always wondered what having a real family was like. He'd been told so many times that his stay with the Gyrus was always going to be a temporary thing, that they were only a foster family. Mika and Kyuteko looked after him as if he were their actual, biological son. He wondered if his Aunt Emi was even capable of taking care of a kid. The scent of his family got stronger as he walked, so he knew he was heading the right way. He followed it silently, wrapped up in his thoughts, everything that could have, should have, would have been, if only. Memories and thoughts were picked apart, his aunt and uncles in most of them, with his sister. Emi was always laughing, making a stupid joke or leaning off him or Aizawa, and it made the corners of his lips tick up. Sooner than he would have liked, the familiar two-story house the Gyrus lived in came into view. 2 cars were parked with the Gyrus out front, and Izuku sighed to himself, eyes to the ground. They hadn't left. All 3 of them, Uncle Sho, Uncle Zashi and Aunt Emi, they'd waited for him. He slipped inside quietly, trying to ignore his thumping, racing heart, and made his way, as slowly as he could, to the lounge. He saw the sleep-deprived hobo first, napping. He spotted the way too loud and bright spotlight hero next, admiring the records and posters on the wall. He saw the silly, joking smile hero last, sitting on the couches with her head in her hands. It was an atmosphere he almost didn't want to step foot in, and wouldn't have, if Aizawa hadn't spotted him. Problem child, the man grunted without sitting up. Next time remember your phone. Mika and Kyuteko both tried calling you a few times before Kyoka found your cell on the table. The tired hero glared at him. Hizashi had whirled around at his husband's voice, and Emi had whipped her head up, their eyes wide open in shock. Zuzu. Where'd you go, kiddo? We were worried. Emi wasted no time in jumping on him and smothering him in a breath-expelling hug. Hizashi joined her not long after, wrapping them both up in his long arms as he wailed about how scared he was when Izuku ran out and to never scare him like that again. The 3 stayed together in their impromptu group hug for a while longer, Hizashi and Emi somehow roping Aizawa into it, too, and that's how Mika, Kyuteko, Kyoka and Nido found them. All things said, Izuku was proud of his sister and new friend when they stifled their laughs and settled for merely grinning mischievously at them instead. Okay, Zashi, Emi, I think you've suffocated him enough, Mika interrupted with a small smile and a twinkle in her eye. The 2 heroes gave him one last tight squeeze and finally let him go, Aizawa having let go a moment before the others walked in. He sat, grumbling, on the couch as his co-workers, husband and friend, took a step back, but fussed over Izuku. To his credit, Izuku stood patiently and endured it while Aizawa sent him looks of amusement crossed with slight pity. He'd been on the other end of one of Hizashi's fussing sessions more than once, and it, somehow, managed to involve more than 3 cats, a meal out, and a lot of stress baking from the man. Eventually, though, Izuku found a way to weasel out of their grips and spirit away to lay on the couch with Aizawa, the 2 trading sympathetic groans and looks. All right, you 3, we're going to give you some space to work things out, we'll be gone for an hour. Shota-kun, please make sure those 2 don't destroy the house, Mika called out, hustling Kyoka, Nato and Kyuteko out of the house even as Kyuteko and Kyoka complained about missing the show, whatever that meant. As they listened to the hum of the car's engine, backing out of the driveway, the 4 of them sat in silence, none of them broaching the topic at hand.
Once the tension in the lounge grew a little too much for him, Aizawa decided to work his magic, by shoving Izuku and Emi into one of the smaller rooms and locking the door behind them, leaving them alone in a small space.
Emi and Izuku stared at each other incredulously, before aiming their gazes of betrayal at the door. After a moment, Emi burst into peals of laughter, even as Izuku held his own deadpan expression, the corners of his lips perking up ever so slightly. He did want to emulate his uncle Shota, mostly because people told him not to, but oh well, they were missing out on a lot. He waited for Emi to calm down, doing his best to fuse with his mind to find a solution to the now awkward silence.
Sorry, kiddo, about the whole reveal thing. I thought that would be fun. I didn't mean to scare you off, Emi began quietly, her eyes looking everywhere but him.
I didn't mean to run off either, it felt like everything was too much, you know? The adoption came as a really big surprise and the way you asked. With all the jokes and laughter, I thought that was a joke too, Izuku explained, just as quietly as Emi.
Ah, kiddo, that would never be a joke. I just never learned to take things seriously. You'd think I would, with Sho as a friend, but nope. She giggled wetly and it was only then that Izuku realized they were both silently crying. How did he not notice the tears? I know you made your hero persona to be a fun, silly person who doesn't take things seriously. I've seen the rubber animals, you construct of insanity, but you really need to learn to take things seriously, he chuckled, leaning into her grip as she wrapped him in yet another hug.
It was a soft one, this time, gentle and loving, and this time, Izuku hugged back. They stood there together for a moment, basking in each other's presence, before Emi leaned back. I don't know, she laughed with a wink, bopping him on the nose. Maybe you should learn to be a little more silly. She did jazz hands and, all of a sudden, Izuku saw the paint. Red paint. Coating her hands. Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. Emi sang with a mad cackle, bursting out of the room with a furious, but trying to hide a smile. Izuku, right on her heels, had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you could even say it glows. Oof. Izuku tackled Emi to the ground, glaring at her as she laughed her head off with no remorse. Did she get you with one of her pranks, Zuzu? Hizashi asked sympathetically, he and Shota sitting at the dining room table, each with a cup of coffee. Yuha, but I'll get her back, she's going to be my new mom, after all, he said smugly. Well, that and Uncle Sho said he'd show me how to make coffee the right way once I turned 13, he grinned savagely at the, very rightly, paling woman. Shota. Two voices screeched, horrified. Aizawa glanced at the two, raising an eyebrow as if to ask, did you really not see this coming? You should work on your investigation skills, if you didn't see this coming, he snorted, taking a sip of his coffee idly, and if you hadn't noticed, Izuku just agreed to be adopted, he added. The other two adults stilled, as Izuku and Shota rolled their eyes and covered their ears. Rightfully so, as the screech of joy the two let out as they jumped up and down and danced around the house, was only quietened by Aizawa's quirk canceling Hizashi's. The house would have collapsed otherwise, Izuku thought, and Shota agreed. As he watched his new mom prance around the house, lit up in joy and screaming her lungs out in excitement, Izuku found himself smiling. Whatever happened in the future, whatever situation or setback he found himself going through, he knew he'd never be alone. He had a future ahead of him, one with his new mom, his uncles and Aunt Mika, his sister Kyoka and his new friend, Nato. He didn't know what was going to happen, no one did, but that was okay. He had a family, he had a dream, and he had belief. Now all he had to do was wait for the time to come, and when it did, the hero schools wouldn't know what hit them. 3 years passed by in a flash, and before Izuku knew it, his 13th birthday had come and gone. It had been a strange few years, with strange changes and strange new people entering his life. After his mom had adopted him and registered the adoption with CPS, he'd slowly but surely moved out of the Jiru's house and in with his new mom. Emi was a brilliant mother, but at times she could be a little careless, reckless, thoughtless. Whatever the word, there were times she didn't quite think things through, and though it usually ended in disaster, they were often the cause of the most fun banter and word play between him and Emi. Once, after a particularly interesting round of Uno, in which Emi had kept cheating, somehow, and Izuku told her to quit in a snappish tone, She poked her tongue out childishly at him and demanded, "Keep your morals away from me," to which Izuku replied, in a mutter under his breath, "I'm going to need therapy after this." More examples of their interactions were more of Izuku snarking at his mother every chance he could. Emi didn't mind, even when he told her to. "Please be quiet, I can't even hear myself losing the will to live, or that, if being clumsy was a currency, you'd be a billionaire."
Each one made Emi lose her cool and she'd burst into laughter.
With her quirk being what it was, they both tried to make sure Emi didn't completely go off laughing spree, but there were also the absolutely ridiculous times when he and his mom had been out and accidentally stopped villains on a rampage because Izuku made her laugh. It made no sense whatsoever, but Izuku supposed such was life when living with someone literally known as the Smile Hero, Ms. Joke. Izuku stared at himself in the mirror in his room. It was bigger than his one at the Gyrus, but it was also a lot more colorful. Emi had insisted, even though he couldn't see color. Along with about half of his instruments, a single king-sized bed, a closet, bedside table and a desk and chair for his homework, his room was littered with dark reds and forest greens that merged into black. Fairy lights had been hung up around his bed and posters of various heroes hung on the walls.
Several plushies lay neatly on his made bed, given as gag gifts across his birthdays.
Why gag gifts? His uncle, Zashi, had been giving him plushies of himself, his uncle Sho, one of his moms, even though they were underground heroes, one of his uncle Tensai's and aunt, Nemi's, even though they'd only met recently, and several of the UA staff. His mom loved it, his uncle Sho thought his uncle, Zashi, was an idiot and he agreed. The plushies themselves were pretty and comfortable, so Izuku kept them, but only after telling his aunts and uncles that he'd burn any others they got him. He had more than enough of them and any more would both be a waste and wouldn't fit onto his bed.
That had ended the plushie spree quickly enough. He smiled to himself, taking in his appearance after 3 long years.
Izuku had grown a little and was now only a couple of centimeters shorter than his sister, Kyoka. He was still short for his age, and slim too, but that was okay. His eyes had dulled a little more, from a dull emerald to a dull min color, and he'd grown his hair out. It was longer than before and he had bangs and a fringe. It came down just past his shoulders, and where it had been a dark green when he was younger, his roots were still the same green, but the tips had darkened fully to a raven black, matching his Uncle Sho's hair. It was still a curly, unruly mess, but now it was an ombre curly and unruly mess. He'd changed just as much as his surroundings had, Izuku mused, raising a hand gently to the mirror. It wasn't as if his blindness had suddenly disappeared, it was still there, but he could see more now. He still had his slim, wiry build, but now it was augmented with lean muscle and the flexibility of a cat. He had long arms and legs, coated lightly with well-trained muscle. His athleticism from his younger years had stayed with him, and to say that he was good at sports was a complete understatement. "Zuzu. You ready to go?" He heard his mom call, and a small smile tickled the corners of his lips, even as he rolled his eyes at the childish nickname. "More ready than you, Mom," he yelled back, huffing a quiet laugh at the silence that followed, silence that meant he was, as usual, right. Without a pause or stumble, Izuku tore himself from the mirror and easily navigated the halls of the apartment, barely needing his quirk at all. He knew the apartment he shared with Emi like the back of his hand at this point. He stopped by the door and pulled on his shoes, standing up and waiting for his mom to come barreling through their home, disheveled and unprepared, still in her slippers with her hair unbrushed and headband askew on her head. It was practically tradition, by now, for Izuku to have to help his short-term memory-esque adoptive mother get ready on a Saturday afternoon. As an underground hero, she usually patrolled at night and Fridays were longer shifts than usual, so she slept in Saturday mornings while Izuku slogged through his half-day of school, before making his way home for his usual Saturday afternoon activities. After the adoption, he'd had to move almost halfway across Musudafu, far away from the Joris. Though they still stayed in close contact, Kyo-chan would always and forever be his sister, Kaori-sensei, in his old school. He had to find new teachers, in both dance and music, ones who'd be willing to teach the disabled, blind kid who had uncanny senses. Thankfully, Kisei and Kagaya, no matter how much Izuku felt like punching them and their wards,
had a few contacts on the north side of Musudafu, and Saturday afternoons were dedicated to dance.
Unfortunately, he hadn't managed to find another music teacher, but Mika and Kyuteko took it upon themselves to send him songs and instructions each week for practice.
Nito and Yuika helped too, having both joined the drama club at their middle school and convinced the rest of the club to at least give Izuku a chance as a musician.
One performance in front of them and their advisor was all it took, really, so he had a few chances at performing a year. I'm here, Emi screeched, tumbling out of the hallway. Huh, Izuku whistled, this is new. You do realize you're not supposed to go out in public in your pajamas, right? He asked her deadpan.
His mother made a sound like that of a strangled cat and raced away, returning not 5 minutes later in her hero outfit, and Izuku sighed again.
I'm ready now. I love your complete confidence in the face of complete ignorance, he replied mildly. Emi groaned, took another look at herself, facepalmed, and left to change again.
What is it with me and the crazy ones? Izuku asked himself, as his mom finally showed up in clothes fit for an outing to a dance studio, then across town to visit Kyo-chan, his Aunt Mika, and his uncles.
Emi pulled a face at him and ushered him out the door. Izuku checked the time before being pushed out the apartment, noting with some surprise that they weren't too late. As long as traffic wasn't bad, they'd make it to the studio on time. You rethink that sentence, author, you are not making me late to dance. What have I told you about breaking the fourth wall? Not to, and I'll stop, if you stop making my life a nightmare, Izuku grumbled. I'm not too happy. Izuku is being annoying about this, but as the saying goes, if you aren't annoying, you aren't human, and he is human, so I just have to deal with it. Now look who's breaking the fourth wall. Shut up and get back in character, you character. Izuku? Are you alright? Emi asked, speeding through the streets like a maniac.
I'm fine, Mom. Just an annoying fly buzzing around in the car. It won't go away, Izuku smirked. Someday I'ma punch him. Alright, then, we should be on time. Traffic isn't too bad today, she grinned, glancing at him quickly, then returning her gaze to the streets she was driving crazily on.
Hey, Mom. You know I'm blind, right? Izuku spoke up carefully. Emi snickered. No, I had no clue my nephew of 5 years and son of 3 was blind. How could I have failed to realize? She asked in a mock horrified tone. Izuku rolled his eyes, deadpanning at her as she laughed at the joke. It's a little hard to miss, Zuzu. I know, it's just, I had an idea, when I was little. Do you remember Gojo Satoru? He wears that blindfold over his eyes all the time even if he isn't blind and, well, I wanted to do the same. It really doesn't matter if I wear one or not, I just thought it would be funny. He shrugged, leaning towards the window and relaxing against it nonchalantly. Emi laughed again, shooting a quick grin over at her son, before the road ahead of her called back her attention.
Fukukado Izuku, if you don't do that, then I'll be mad at you. She told him, giggling. You better confuse the heck out of everyone, though, and play dumb if they ask about it.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have asked. You aren't really the best person for these sorts of things. Excuse you. I'm a great role model, says the hero trying to convince her son to run around and confuse people with a blindfold. He snarked back at her. Emi pouted, pulling into the driveway of the dance studio right on time. We're going shopping for some after dance, so we might be a little late to lunch with the Jiros and Monomas. Oh yeah, Shota said he and Zashi adopted recently, so they're bringing their own kid over. Be nice, Izuku, and make sure Kyoka-chan and Nato-kun don't attack anyone this time. See you soon, kiddo. Emi yelled as Izuku jumped out of the car and sprinted inside. Well, if it isn't Sightless, one of the kids sneered. Izuku sighed, he recognized that voice. Marana-san, great to see you again, not, he smirked as he saw his old daycare bully stiffen. Shut the hell up, you blind freak. What the hell are you doing at my studio? Seriously, I didn't know you grew up to be a possessive blowhard. It's not anyone's studio except the owner's, and if I remember correctly, I've been coming here for 3 years. This is your first day. If anything, it's more mine than yours. And I'm here to dance, so get off my back and focus on your terrible posture, he shot back, setting his bag and jacket against the wall to start stretching. Marana had been doing the same, but straightened up to start glaring at him for his last remark. At least I can actually see what I'm doing, she snaps and Izuku snorts. So can I sensory Quirk, remember? He smirks, or can you really not remember the day you started to pick on me? Shut your mouth, I'm going to be a hero and there's no way a blind stick in the grass like you will ever be anything more than a sightless, helpless loser. Marana-san. Keep that kind of talk outside the studio. We do not tolerate those kinds of remarks here. If you don't accept this, you can leave. The dance teacher, a slim woman of average height, walked through the door, wispy lilac hair tied up in a tight bun. Yes ma'am, sorry about that, Marana grumbled, glaring at Izuku. Not to me, I wasn't the one you insulted. If you insist, however, Fukukado-kun is one of our studio's best students, blind or otherwise, whereas you would do well to learn you are not the best at everything. She eyed Marana coolly. Izuku hid a smirk.
Where's everyone else today, Madame Furuya? Izuku spoke up. The dance teacher's eyes softened the slightest bit as she glanced over at Izuku.
Atsuyo-san and Kumiko-san have informed me that the pair of them are sick and won't be making it to a few lessons, and Riku-san and Imio-san are visiting relatives outside of Tokyo for a couple of weeks. I do not know where the others have gone, but Himiha-san, Deku-san and Mariah-san informed me they will be late to class today. We're here, sorry for being late. 3 girls rushed into the dance studio, hurriedly dumping their gear against the wall and beginning to warm up. Izuku nodded cordially at him as they chirped out greetings, their eyebrows furrowing in confusion as they saw Marana. Madame Furuya, who's that? Do we have a new dance mate? One of the girls asked excitedly. Perhaps, if she can curb her tongue for the rest of our session. Madame Furuya glared at Marana, who huffed and rolled her eyes. Izuku sighed, silently taking his place in the middle of the floor. The 3 girls eyed Marana with some confusion, but copied Izuku, Marana following them. Madame Furuya nodded acceptance.
Very well then, class will begin. Marana will sit out for the first half and work on bar exercises while the rest of you get to working on your routines. I know only Fukukado-kun's gotten approval for his. Madame Furuya scowled at the 3 girls, who winced. The recital's in a month and I expect all of your routines to be finished and perfected by then, understood?
Yes, Madame Furuya, the class chorused, before they split into different corners of the room. Marana made her way to the bar with a scowl at not getting to dance right away, but she knew if she didn't follow orders she'd be thrown out of class and then have to find another studio to dance at.
She got to work, glaring at Izuku all the while. Izuku ignored the less than friendly eyes on him, slowly going through the motions of his routine. In all honesty, he was lucky it was approved. There were some jumps and moves in there Madame Furuya questioned his capability in, but after Izuku's stout assurance of being able to pull them off, the dance matron reluctantly approved it. As she'd said, the recital was in a month and it was his chance to show what he, a blind boy, could do to everyone who came.
As long as he could help it, no one would ever call him helpless again.
The lesson passed quickly and before Izuku knew it, he was packing up his things and racing outside to the car park, where his mom was waiting impatiently.
He was in the car and buckled up in an instant, and then they were off, careening crazily through the streets so they had time to go shopping and make it to lunch with their family on time. That was another thing that had changed over the 3 years he'd spent with Emi. Izuku had become an incorrigible, straight-faced prankster. He didn't know how that had happened, nor when this developed, but he knew it had and he knew it wouldn't fade.
He supposed the years of being Kyo-chan's brother, Nito's friend and Emi's son, as well as the nephew of 2, fun-loving present Mike, and petty Eraserhead heroes.
This was why he found himself inside a cloth store close to the Girou's house, eagerly looking for blindfolds with his ecstatic mother. Emi was just barely keeping from cackling with glee at the thought of Izuku's newest round of fun. If it wasn't for Izuku's tight grip on his emotions, he would have lost it at the sight of the poor store attendant, completely lost at what a young woman and young boy would ever want with the absolutely numerous blindfolds they were collecting. Even better were the completely absurd patterns and pictures they found. Look at this, Zuzu. What even? Emi hooted, holding up an atrociously colored piece of cloth. Mom. Why on earth? Izuku groaned, glaring lightly at her. Emi grinned brightly at her son. Because we can, she replied enthusiastically. The blindfold was garish and bright, Izuku assumed, given that he still couldn't see color. His vision was as monochromatic as the day he became blind.
It had a strange pattern of stars and stripes, like the American #1 hero. But why? He replied, resisting the urge to face palm and leave the room.
Emmy put down the garish blindfold, her eyes taking on a mischievous glint and her smile took on a strange shape. Zuzu, we're picking out several different sets for you, that's why, she told him, going back to poring over the cloth bins. Izuku turned his attention back to them too, his mom's words running through his thoughts. Different sets, is there a reason? He asked. He did his best to keep his voice steady. His mom seemed to pick up on Izuku's lingering thoughts. I know you think of this as a brilliant prank, Zuzu, and it is. There's just so much else you could use these for than just a simple prank. For example, say you choose to go limelight. Emmy held up a piece of cloth. The blindfold would not only confuse villains, but it would also be a statement. To yourself, to the public, you would be a blind hero, a hero with a disability. Some would be against it, sure, but more still would adore it. You would give others hope with the knowledge of a blind hero, others like you. Besides, with the different sets, there's no telling what people would be willing to say knowing they're saying it to a blind kind. Her grin lit up the store and Izuku had to agree that his classmates' reactions to his increasingly bizarre blindfolds would be absolutely hilarious to listen to.
So he sighed, beeped up his embarrassment at the store clerk's obvious disbelief and incredulity at the checkout and left with a blindfold over his eyes, hiding a smile at his mother's cackling.
They'd collected a couple bags full of blindfolds. Izuku didn't really care about what color they were. He couldn't see colors anyway, but his mom had said there were lots of green and red ones.
Izuku could work with that. The blindfolds were sorted and labeled into different categories so Izuku could tell what they were.
They'd have to label each of them separately so he could pick what he wanted to wear each day. He did think his mother had a good point, not that he'd ever admit that out loud. Emmy would never let it go, otherwise, and he didn't need anything to inflate his mother's already large head.
She had way too many jokes in mind as it was. Come on, Squirt, Kyoka-chan and Nito-kun are too impatient to be kept waiting for long. She cackled, flinging herself into the car. Izuku rolled his eyes underneath the blindfold, before diving into the car after her. What could he say? He took more after his mother than he'd ever admit.
You're the one driving. Don't kill us, please. Otherwise they'd be waiting forever for us and we'd never come, he drawled, buckling himself up. Emmy snorted as she slipped the car into action and they were back on the streets praying to God they'd make it in one piece.
A thought came to Izuku's mind and he couldn't help the giggle that escaped him. What's that for? Emmy asked him as they both ignored the loud honking from another car as she cut them off. Izuku weighed the pros and cons of telling her, then caved. Just a thought. A quote from one of those anime you love. I cannot guarantee this will be a safe or comfortable ride. Enter the vehicle at your own risk. For the love of God, please buckle up. Sounds a lot like your car rides, Izuku smirked, even as his mother let go of the steering wheel to smack him upside the head.
Don't be a smartass, brat, she smirked. Izuku rolled his eyes. When you start learning to drive properly, Izuku stressed, flattening himself against his seat. Oi, I'm a great driver, says the squealing tires and angrily horn-honking other drivers, he pointed out.
Emmy was many things, but a good driver she was not. She could drive and get around, definitely, but did she follow the road rules properly, or did she stretch them to the point of breaking, but still legal? She was and heroes of the underground were notorious for bending rules as far as they could go, but not breaking them. Come to think of it, his Uncle Sho drove just as badly, or maybe worse, than his mom did, and boy, wasn't that a scary thought? Two drivers just as bad as each other, and didn't his mom say his uncles had just adopted? Boy, he hoped the kid would never be in need of a ride and Uncle Zashi wasn't around. The car ride didn't take too long, especially with his mother's crazy driving at the familiar, two-story house he'd lived in for 5 years came into view. He could see Aunt Mika waiting for him with a smile. Uncle Kyuteko was standing with her, his Kyo-chan jumping eagerly up and down between them. Nito stood with his parents, a wide grin on his face, and next to them stood his uncles Sho and Zashi, a tall, lanky boy with fluffy purple hair that looked like it defied gravity with them. He looked bored, confused and suspicious all at once.
Izuku waited for Emi to park, before hopping out of the car. It took all of 5 seconds for him to be bombarded with his 2 friends jumping on top of him. "Izu-kun." Kyoka squealed. "It's been forever. You haven't visited in ages," she beamed at him. "Indeed, my friend, we missed your presence among us mere mortals, and for this you shall be punished with hugs," Nato declared. Izuku withstood it all with a sigh, glancing at the purple boy with a dry look. His friends hadn't even noticed the blindfold, but it seemed he did. "What the hell?" the boy whispered, shocked beyond belief. Izuku snorted. "Do you mean Kyo-chan and Nei-kun, or do you mean the blindfold?" he asked, smirked when his 2 friends froze comically at his words and jumped off him, staring at his eyes with wide-open mouths and eyes. A small giggle came from the gaggle of adults. "Of course you two didn't notice," Aizawa drawled, hiding a smirk in his capture weapon.
"Don't be mean, Sho, they were excited," Hazashi admonished.
Mika giggled. "You're right on that front, so eager," she grinned. Kyoka and Izuku made faces while Nato blushed. They hadn't figured it out, did they?
He didn't want Izuku to find out until high school, that way Nato could woo him properly.
Kyoka helped him make his plan. "Gross mom. Izuku's my brother," Kyoka fake gagged. Izuku nodded in agreement with his sister. They grew up together, practiced and made fun of each other. Romance was the last thing on both their minds, and he knew Kyoka knew that.
Besides, Kyoka wasn't the one he wanted to impress. She was his sister and he loved her like one, but someone else beat her.
"Oh Kyo, dear, we weren't trying to imply anything," Kyuteko hurried to reassure her. That didn't stop her from scowling at her grinning parents. "I'm sorry, can we return to the fact there's a kid in a blindfold and no one cares?" The purple teen spoke up incredulously, and Izuku sighed when he heard Emi start to cackle. "That's it Izuku, I told you it would be priceless," she hooted.
"Yeah, but this was my idea, so go talk boring adult talk with the adults and us kids can go do something fun in my room," Izuku snarked at her, snagging the purple teen, Kyo-chan and Nito, and leading them inside the house as the adults' laughter echoed behind them.
The purple teen seemed beyond confused at this point, while his sister and friend were relaxed, giggling to themselves. Izuku must have let out a laugh or a giggle of his own, because all eyes were on him.
He sighed, a smile playing on his lips as he pulled them all into his bedroom.
"All right, what the heck is going on here? Who are you and why are Aizawa and Yamada so relaxed at my kidnapping?" The purple teen exploded, glaring at them all. His eyes then fell on Izuku, and he didn't need his quirk to know the boy was suspicious of him. "And what the hell is up with that blindfold? You people are crazy," he groaned, running a hand down his face. "Crazy awesome," Kyo-chan smirked. Izuku snickered and Nato cackled, earning flower-withering glares from the purple teen. Izuku relented on the teasing, just slightly.
"We should probably start with names," Izuku took charge.
"I'll go first then." Kyoka grinned. "I'm Jiru Kyoka, I like music and I want to be a hero. My quirk is earphone jack." She extended her ear jacks and wiggled them at him.
My good new friend, I'm Monoma Nito, future hero extraordinaire and a fan of the wonderfully whimsical life of theater," Nito announced in his own special way. The purple teen just stared at him as if the blonde was crazy. Izuku deadpanned at Nito with a sigh and translated for him. He knew not everyone could decipher his speeches.
"That's Monoma Nato, he likes acting and dramas and he wants to be a hero. He didn't tell you his quirk because he likely forgot in his excitement." Izuku glared playfully at Nato, who smirked at Izuku without a care. "It's called copy. He can copy emitter and transformation quirks for up to 5 minutes at a time and 3 at once." "Cool, isn't it?" Izuku asked, his eyes shining.
The purple teen eyed Izuku suspiciously and Izuku rolled his own eyes under the blindfold.
"And you are?" the purple teen asked dryly. Izuku sighed again.
"Fukukado Izuku, I like playing pranks on everyone and reading. I want to be a hero. My quirk's called earthbending. Yes, I can see, but also yes, I'm blind," Izuku replied, offering up no other information, and the purple teen glared at him, That seemed to be the theme between him and Izuku couldn't say he was a fan. He'd be lying.
This was getting on his nerves. Badly. That's it? That makes no sense. There is something wrong with all of you, he grumbled.
Yeah, but at least we introduced ourselves. Besides, my brother doesn't owe anyone an explanation. Kyoka folded her arms, defending Izuku.
The boy only seemed to grow more confused. Izuku could see the cogs in his head turning and the frustration building as the boy struggled to figure it out. Izuku gave him the answer quietly. My parents died in car crashes when I turned 5 and Kyo-chan and her parents took me in. My mom adopted me 3 years ago, but Kyo-chan and I are siblings, through and through, he said, and the boy sighed, sitting down and trying to calm down. Sorry, it's been a day, the teen said, exhaling deeply. Yeah, I get that. Today has been chaos, pretty much. I ran into one of my old bullies today. She still hasn't gotten her act together, so I had to suffer through an entire morning of snide comments. Izuku grimaced, smiling quickly at the teen, who relaxed at Izuku's confession. You have bullies too? He asked hopefully and confused at the same time.
Yeah, when I was really little. My Quirk came in late. The other kids teased and tormented me viciously. He shivered at the bad memories flooding him.
Pushing you out of food lines, stealing the toys you were playing with, pushing, shoving, blaming things on you when they messed up? The boy asked.
Izuku nodded with a wince. You too. How bad was it? Izuku gave the boy a smile as he slowly relaxed.
Not as bad as that. It never got physical. I did get in trouble whenever I talked, so the other kids liked to push me to the forefront whenever they got into trouble for stuff and I couldn't contradict them. They took full advantage of that, the boy responded. Ah. So I had the assholes, you had the jerks, and Nato and Kyo-chan had the asses and jerkholes. Izuku grinned at the snort of laughter he drew from the other boy. You have a way of words, don't you? The boy questioned him. Yeah, and no one will ever believe you, Izuku smirked. The boy let out a bark of laughter as Kyoka cleared her throat, glaring at them, unimpressed. Did you two seriously forget we exist? She gestured to Nato and herself. No, but we definitely ignored your presences, Izuku retorted. She glared as Izuku sniggered. So, Purple Kid, do you have a name? She flicked her attention to the purple boy. Of course I do. The question is whether or not I give it to you, he snarked. Oh, I like this kid. Kyo-chan. Izuku grinned. Kyoka rolled her eyes at him and shook her head.
There are 2 of them now, she groaned. You've got to admit, my dearest Kyoka, 2 of them does mean more fun, Nito interjected with a grin of his own. Kyoka turned a glare on him, but Nito remained unfazed. My name's Shinso Hitoshi. I want to be a hero too, an underground one, though. I can't stand it when I'm the center of attention, he shuddered. I like cats and coffee and my quirk is brainwashing. A villain's quirk, he grimaced. Izuku frowned at his choice of wording. I'm afraid that's where you're wrong, Hito-chan. Whoa, what? Where'd the nickname come from? Hitoshi wrinkled his nose at it. Izuku's expression fell. He thought he'd chosen a good one for his newest friend. Don't mind the nicknames, we have one for all of us. I'm Kyo or Kyo-chan. Izuku's Izu. Zuzu. Izu-kun or Izuku-chan, and Nito's Ne-chan or Ne-kun. Kyoka shrugged. Hitoshi groaned. Would you not call me that if I told you I hate nicknames? Nope. They replied with sly grins. Thought not, he grumbled. Izuku giggled at his disgruntled expression. You said you want to be a hero too, right? Where do you want to go? Ne-chan and Kyo-chan want to go there too. I don't, though. Want to train together. Is Uncle Sho training you? What type of? A hand muffled his sudden stream of words. Breathe, Izuku. I don't think Hito-chan got all that, Kyoka chuckled. Izuku grinned sheepishly. Have you started training yet? Uncle Sho and Uncle Zashi are the best teachers you could get. Uncle Zashi has a lot of experience with vocal quirks and Uncle Sho's a combat master. Then we can all train together and become heroes together. Izuku slowed down and relayed his plans to the purple teen. Hitoshi blinked at Izuku, shocked. You want to be a hero with me? Yeah, there are hero teams, Hito-chan. Kyo-chan, Ne-chan and I are going to be an underground hero team, and since you're going to be our quad, you're obviously joining us, Izuku said as if it were logic. Hitoshi hesitated, then smiled, then grinned.
Yeah, sounds like a plan, he said. He was smiling so wide it hurt and Izuku grinned, himself.
That gives us 2 years, guys, to train for hero schools. Let's do this.
Yeah. The years passed quickly and soon, Izuku's second and third years in middle school came to an end.
It was finally time for the most nerve-wracking exams of his life.
He'd applied for only 2 schools, both hero schools. He knew which one he'd attend already, but he wanted to placate his uncles by taking UA's entrance exams at least. His mother taught at Ketsubutsu Academy and he'd been planning to go there since he was adopted 4 years ago.
The exams were still a week away, though, and he would have thrown himself into training if he was nervous, but that was never a good idea. The one time he did, he was grounded for a quarter of a year and forbidden from training for half of one.
That time was torture, but at least he had his instruments to keep him from getting too bored. He wasn't stopped from doing basic exercises and going through warm-up motions, but he hadn't been allowed to use his quirk to train or do any martial arts. A lot of that time was spent observing his dead master, Toph, which ended up being incredibly useful, more so than he first thought. Hey Izuku-kun, over here, he heard his sister's voice call.
Izuku spun around, using his quirk to pick her out of the crowd in the shopping mall. He sensed her figure by a fountain in the center, 2 others by her side, and he knew those figures well. Izuku grinned and made his way over to them nimbly, dodging, ducking and weaving through the crowds around.
Sometimes, being short was a good thing. His grin widened as he heard several voices and figures pointing and whispering in disbelief at him. He knew why, and the blindfold he was wearing today was one of his favorites. This was the one he planned on wearing to his exams.
Soon enough, he had arrived at the fountain and was jogging up to his friends. His purple-haired, goth girl sister brightened up at his appearance and wrapped him in a hug. They had both grown over the 2 years, but frustratingly enough, Izuku wasn't that much taller than her.
Nato gave him a courteous boy with a flirtatious wink and he rolled his eyes under his blindfold. Nato had also grown, but more into himself than upwards. He was fit, like they all were, with a lithe build and cat-like reflexes. He'd suited grappling styles and, surprisingly enough, Aikido best when they trained, and he was good.
Izuku guessed it was because his quirk required touch to work. He'd also grown more handsome. No, Izuku. We are not going there. He had a nice smile and a nice figure to ogle, but his kindness and flair for the dramatics had never changed.
It was one of the reasons Izuku found the blonde so attractive. Izuku bowed in return, doing nothing to hide the soft, absolutely in love smile he wore whenever he was around Nato. Then it was Hitoshi's turn. The purple teen took one look at Izuku's blindfold and groaned loudly. Hitoshi had grown the most out of all of them. He was the tallest with broad shoulders and a muscular build, but he was flexible and pliant, fast, strong and agile. He built up a whole toolbox full of tricks both with his quirk and without it.
Izuku was still the best fighter there, but Nato, Hitoshi and Kyoka always made him fight for the wins.
Seriously, Izuku? You're wearing that hideous thing? He saw Hitoshi wrinkle his nose at the atrocious blindfold. Personally, Izuku didn't think it looked too bad, but then again, he couldn't see in color and details kinda blurred together if he looked at them for too long, so he wasn't sure how accurate he was with his assessment.
Please tell me you've reconsidered wearing that thing to the exams, Izuku, or so help me I will disown you as my brother, Kyoka threatened. Izuku snorted at her attempt. We both know you'd miss the competition I bring to the table too much to do that, Kyo-chan, so how about you threaten me with something that would work? He smirked at her.
And that, my dear friends, is a point to Izuku. The score is now 220 to 230. Nato interjected.
Damn it, I was catching up to you, too, Kyoka grumbled, offering him a disgruntled frown.
Izuku gave a small giggle as Hitoshi rolled his eyes. You keep believing that, Kyo-chan, you keep believing that, won't make it any more true than it isn't. Nato piped up again, which left Izuku smirking pridefully and Kyoka glaring at her brother. Hitoshi pushed between the two of them, glaring at them both. Will you two cut it out with your wordplay competition? This is getting seriously messed up and we only have an hour and a half before Dad and Pops pick us up. Do you think we can get a move on? And Izuku, I swear. Take that stupid blindfold off, it's making people stare. Hitoshi scolded them both.
Once they looked suitably chastened, he then turned on Nito and told him off for egging their friends on.
Izuku sighed quietly as he took off the blindfold, stuffing it in his favorite dark green shoulder bag and pulled out a different one.
He knew why his friends and sister hated the blindfold, but Izuku found it hilarious. It was a plain white piece of cloth, but two ducks had been drawn on the front of it and one was wearing a completely white blindfold. There was a speech bubble next to it that read, "Haha, I'm blind and you're not," as if the blind duck was taunting the other, normal duck. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever and was completely stupid. Aizawa found it one day and gave it to Izuku for his 14th birthday last year. It was instantly his favorite even as everyone else yelled at his uncle for feeding his ridiculous prank.
Izuku had to admit, it was a brilliant practical joke, but maybe the ducks were going a bit too far.
He could concede on that, at least, couldn't he? He relented and pulled his spare blindfold on, tying it expertly himself behind his head. This was an equally hideous one, but a little tame in comparison to the duck one he'd just been wearing.
It was a mass of weird patterns and colors and looked ridiculous, but no more so than the other dozens of blindfolds he had back at home. So, where in this wondrous world of fashion are we headed to? Nato asked with a smile. Izuku snorted at his dramatic antics. The four of them had decided to take the week off from training to prepare and rest up for exams. A plan the three hero parents completely agreed on, which was why they were at the mall.
All of them needed at least some new equipment and in Kyoka's and Hitoshi's cases, wanted to finally see Nito and Izuku get together.
Or at least go on a date. It was obvious to them their friends were pining for each other. Nato made it obvious he was interested in Izuku. Izuku, for however smart and observant he was, turned out to be utterly useless with detecting and using emotions. It took the purple duo a while to figure out Izuku had feelings for Nato, but when they did, they both teased him mercilessly for it.
Can we go looking for shoes? I need new running shoes and a tracksuit. I know I should have gotten them a while ago, but I didn't notice they were falling apart until they fell apart. It's not like I use them often, Izuku sighed. The others nodded energetically at his self-criticism, but Nito laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. Fear not, my brave companion, we shall seek and find our treasures. Onwards. The dramatic blonde grinned, leading Izuku off into the stream of shoppers.
Oh my gosh, Kyoka and Hitoshi deadpanned at the same time, before turning to each other.
How do they not see this? They're head over heels for each other. Kyoka complained.
You know them, Kyo-chan. Hopeless is what they are. Neither of them would be able to read emotions even if it was written in straight Japanese, Hitoshi huffed with a wry smile. It's annoying. Kyoka scowled, kicking at the ground.
I know, but you helped Nito plan his big moment, right? That question made Kyoka grin.
Yeah. Even better as I got your parents in on it, too, and they got the whole UA staff to help. Izu's going to be so embarrassed, pure blackmail material. She cheered, smirking deviously at Hitoshi, who laughed at her. He shook his head, wondering where Kyoka could have possibly gotten her sly and revenge-seeking nature from, but then he realized his dad, their uncle Shota, pretty much helped raise her since she was 5 and he was the pettiest man anyone would ever meet. It wasn't as much of a shock if he thought of it that way. I need a few energy drinks and Dad bribed me into buying him jelly packets. Want to head off to the mart? Hitoshi asked Kyoka and she considered the question, before ultimately agreeing to it. He knew she would, just as he knew what she was going to say next.
Sure, but we have to hit the music shop afterwards. There are some records on sale that I have to get. They're vintage. Her eyes sparkled. Hitoshi chuckled fondly. Will you let me take you on a date after we get our results from UA's entrance exam? Hitoshi smiled softly at her. Kyoka looked up at him in surprise, then turned away, her shoulders shaking. Hitoshi grimaced. Had he messed up? Did she not like the idea? Why, you certainly took your time, waiting like that. I've been waiting for that question ever since I figured I was bi and not straight gay. You owe me, Toshi, Kyoka stuttered, hiding her red face and punching him lightly on the shoulder. Hitoshi's face lit up as he nodded quickly. They walked off in silence, but if anyone noticed how their hands weaved together, no one in the crowd at the mall said a thing.
Too bad Izuku and Nato weren't having it so easy. Nato was quick to split off from the group with Izuku, but that was before he realized he'd be alone with the boy he loved. Nato had a flair for the dramatic, sure, but he didn't count spouting nonsensical lines to his crush as drama. The blonde groaned inwardly as he let Izuku lead him around the sports store, critically eyeing the goods on the shelves. Izuku didn't have any sense of color. His sight took that with it when it left him and never gave it back, so as long as something fit him, he bought it, but that also led Izuku to having the worst fashion sense Nato had ever seen.
There was a reason Emi had always forbidden Izuku from going clothing shopping alone, and Nato had never properly understood why until now, as Izuku picked up a stupidly bright tracksuit his size. "Izu-kun, my dear, that garish thing shan't suit you in the slightest," Nato told Izuku gently, carefully taking the tracksuit from him and hanging it back on the rack. Izuku huffed at Nato, folding his arms, and Nato thought he was about to die.
Why did Izuku have to be so cute? It's fine if it's in size, right? Izuku complained, sighing as he crinkled his eyebrows. What's wrong with my pick this time? A few other shoppers glanced their way and snickered.
"You don't have much sense for colors, do you, kid?" One of the employees questioned him with a grin. He approached from behind and Izuku spun around to face him, the kid blanching when he caught sight of the blindfold. "Seeing as I'm blind and my quirk's sensory aspect doesn't return color to my vision, no, I don't have much of a sense of colors," Izuku told him plainly. The employee breathed a sigh of relief. "Don't scare me like that, kid. I really thought you were completely blind," he muttered.
"I am blind. Can't see to save my life, but I don't need my eyes to see," Izuku said cryptically. Before the employee could even begin to decipher that remark, Nato jumped in with a forest green tracksuit in Izuku's eyes and matching sneakers.
"Go try these, Izu-kun, they should fit," he said. Izuku nodded reluctantly, taking the clothes and shoes and heading for a changing room. He employee smirked at Nato knowingly. "That's one hell of an eye you got, kiddo, good pick," he whistled.
"Izuku's the best," Nato blushed. "I have a confession planned, but I'm not sure he'll accept it."
"Trust me, Blondie," the employee laughed, slapping Nato on the back with a wide grin. "He's as smitten for you as you are for him."
Nato exploded into crimson. "Is it that obvious?" Nato whined, covering his face with his hands while the employee of the store snickered at his obliviousness. "Oh, absolutely, I don't think anyone thought otherwise," the employee gestured around to the other shoppers, several of which either grinned, winked or did both at him. Nato whined again, when Izuku popped up beside the two.
"It fits. Should we take it?" he asked, then stared at Nato as if examining him under an X-ray. "Are you all right, Ne-chan? Was this guy bothering you?" Izuku sent a suspicious glare to the store employee. The man smirked and raised his hands in a mock gesture of surrender.
Nato hurried to assure Izuku he was all right. "I'm perfectly fine, Izuku. I am the White Knight here to rescue you from fashion disasters." He grinned dashingly at Izuku. Izuku felt himself smiling at Nito's silly antics. "Yeah kid, calm down. I didn't touch your boyfriend," Izuku squawked at the store employee, feeling his ears get hot. "What kind of stupidity was that? I'm not his boyfriend, don't you have a job to get back to?" he hissed menacingly. Yet, the employee shot back, "And I don't think anyone's minding with the show we're putting on." Izuku scowled at him, then turned on his heel and stalked off to the checkouts, Nato following close behind him. The employee chuckled, then felt arms slip around his waist. "Who were they, yo?" came a quiet voice that sounded as smooth as silk. "A couple of kids pining for each other, nothing to worry about, Hattori," the employee patted the arms circling his waist. "They were cute, do you think we'll see them again? Maybe, I don't know, but the green-haired kid does look familiar. Didn't Ms. Joke-sensei tell us she adopted a kid who'd be coming to Ketsubutsu next year?" the employee asked.
Maybe. If he is, he'll be a lot of fun. Don't annoy the poor kid too much, you'll break him, you know." "I didn't break you, because I know how to deal with your quirk. Your eyes don't work on me, Hattori." "I don't think they'll work on the kid, either, yo. He did say he was blind." "I doubt it'll work. Besides, how will we get close to him?
I have a feeling this won't be easy. Do you still want to try? The arms encircling the employee's waist tightened. Of course I do, yo. He seems like such an interesting friend to make, and we can teach him a lot of things to do with his quirk he hasn't figured out. Okay Hattori, just take it easy, okay? Not everyone is as welcoming of quirks like yours as our class is. We don't want to scare him off, particularly if Ms. Joke-sensei's his mom. I guess you're right, yo. Anyway, when does your shift end? Wanna go on a date?
I want to do whatever if it's with you Hattori. Was there anywhere you wanted to go?
Coffee. Anywhere's fine as long as there's coffee. I want some. If I didn't know better, I'd swear your quirk was powered by coffee, the way you down it. You like coffee just as much as I do and you know it. No, Hattori, I don't. I can't, no one loves coffee more than you do.
True, coffee is the lifeblood of the black and soulless.
Really? Did you have to get all goth on me? Get real Hattori? The conversation shifted away as Izuku's quirk stretched itself to the limit.
Izuku didn't let anything show on his face, but hoped beyond all measure that he ended up staying far away from those two weird kids when he got into Ketsubutsu. The day of the entrance exam arrived without fanfare. Izuku woke up to his alarm beeping at him and he hopped out of bed, getting dressed in a hurry. He could feel the sun's warmth smiling down on him through his window, but all Izuku really felt was anticipation.
He wasn't actually trying to pass the exams. He didn't want to get into UA, he was merely moral support for his friends, who were trying to get into UA.
He could smell breakfast in the kitchen, and he saw his mother's figure running around in the kitchen trying to not burn whatever was in the pan on the stove.
He knew it was burning. Izuku sighed and shook his head with a smile on his face. His mom was useless at anything not teaching or heroics related, but other than that, she was ridiculously bad at everything else. He tied a blindfold over his eyes and packed his shoulder bag with his tracksuit and running shoes. He'd broken them in over the week so he wouldn't get blisters on his feet during the exam and hinder him for Ketsubutsus.
His pencil case and several braille books were shoved in, too, because while Izuku didn't want to sound like he was bragging, he knew he'd be one of the first kids finished with their written tests.
He wasn't arrogant, he was smart. Everyone told him so he had to be, right? Several spare blindfolds, including the duck one, were chucked into it, too. He sensed his mother packing him a lunchbox and rolled his eyes, marching out of his room, ready for the exam.
Hey Mom, what did you burn for breakfast this morning? He called, ducking under one of her special rubber chickens she used for harrowing being thrown at him and sat down at the table, chuckling.
She almost never got a rise out of him, but he always managed to make her pout. My own son's being rude to me, oh the agony, my life is falling apart. Oh my dear sweet boy, how could you do this to me? She wailed dramatically, smothering him with hugs and kisses. Izuku sighed and let her, glancing over his shoulder at her, unamused. Need I remind you I have an exam I can't be late for? He asked mildly. Of course not, but my baby's not worried about passing. After all, he's going to get into Ketsubutsu where his mommy works and be with me forever. Emi cackled madly, grinning at him and ruffling his hair.
She set a plate down in front of him and he stared at it.
Wow Mom, he began. I can't believe you managed to not burn anything, he said incredulously. His mom nodded proudly and he tucked into breakfast hungrily. Yup. I put in all this effort for you, so go kick butt, and please just ask little NATO out already. This pining thing the two of you have going on is getting ridiculous, she replied, taking a seat opposite him and starting on her own breakfast.
It's not pining. Besides, Nei-chan doesn't like me like that Mom. We're friends and I don't want to hurt that, Izuku mumbled. Emi sighed, but let the subject go.
Are you all ready for the exam? Do you have everything? I made you lunch for your lunch, Emi muttered, then paused and re-said her words. Izuku snorted.
You made me lunch for lunch. Gee, thanks Mom. I didn't know I'd be having lunch for lunch. It's such a treat, he intoned with only the ghost of a smile hovering about his lips to indicate his mood. Emi rolled her eyes fondly and gently clipped her son on the back of his head.
Come on, smarty pants, into the car with you if you're ready. Aren't you going to get ready? We had a whole scene to perform when we got to UA. You know, The one Uncle Sho said he'd kill us for if we even thought of doing it in front of all those people. He couldn't help the eager tone seeping into his voice. This wasn't his idea, he swore. He heard Emmy cackle and relaxed. He felt her disappear into her room and return with a pair of costumes.
He couldn't help the smile that spread slowly over his face. His uncle was going to hate him for this, but this was going to be brilliant.
Of course I wouldn't forget. Anything to get under my dear Shota's skin. Besides, Principal Nezu's not going to complain about us causing a little bit of chaos, she grinned, handing him one of the costumes. Izuku couldn't stop smiling as he took it carefully. I know Ne-chan loves drama, but how did we talk him into this, again? You asked. He can't say no to the other half of his OTP and said yes. Emmy shrugged, smirking at his confused expression. If there was one thing that absolutely stumped him, it was slang like that. Put that on, grab your violin and let's get going. Don't want to be late, do we? She asked, and it was Izuku's turn to shrug. 10 minutes later they were both walking out of their apartment in the most ridiculous outfits Emmy could find and speeding down the street in Emmy's car to UA's entrance exams.
Izuku had gotten used to his mom's crazy driving and let out a laugh.
So, Uncle Sho's going to kill us for this, isn't he? He asked as they stood outside UA's gates. Students in all sorts of uniforms were gawking at them openly, not bothering to hide their stares. It made sense. Izuku would be staring too, if he could. Emmy was dressed as a pre-Quirk era pirate, hook-hand, eye-patch, stained, ragged and wide-sleeved, colorful clothing, and Izuku in white. A flowing outfit that could have been easily mistaken for a wedding dress, if not for the clear parting of the free-flowing half-top and billowing pants. A white lace veil covered his face and of course his shoes were non-existent. He carried his violin in one hand and its bow in the other, waiting for NATO to show so they could begin their performance. Of course he is, so we have to give a great performance before we die, she replied off-handedly.
The car had been parked not too far away, so the walk they took to get to UA wasn't that much of a hike. What ho my friend, you fiendish pirate. Return my musician this instant. Came a loud, amused voice, the signal for their impromptu performance to begin. Emmy swept Izuku up and Izuku brought bow to string and began playing as Nito, dressed as a pre-Quirk nobleman confronted the fiendish pirate, that was his mother's character.
Never. She cackled and the pair began a back-and-forth dance that had the examinees gawking. Izuku knew why. Were the fencing foils a touch too much? Oh well, it was too late to do anything now.
Izuku was swept up in their fight, moving swiftly and elegantly between Nito and Emmy as they fought, with their blades, tugged this way and that, but constantly playing and tell.
Oh my gosh, Izu-kun. I cannot believe you, his sister's voice groaned amusedly. You two better get going. Pops found it hilarious, but Dad's on his way over and he's going to kill you three, though the reactions you got are freaking brilliant, Hitoshi smirked.
Izuku stopped playing, flipped up the veil and grinned. Emmy and Nito disengaged and, with a flourish, set their fencing foils away. Emmy winked Izuku, high-fiving him before bolting.
Izuku and Nato bowed cheekily to their unsuspecting audience.
This has been a pleasant beyond pleasant experience, my dears, Nito began with a grin.
Thank you for watching, our dear examinees. Enjoy the next 5 hours, Izuku called, his face lit up with joy.
Fukukato Izuku and Monoma Nito. What are you doing? Came the incredibly quiet voice of Aizawa Shota, a band of capture weapons sliding around his and Nito's waists. Izuku simply grinned at his uncle, shrugging mischievously.
I know you said not to do it, but since when did I ever listen to reason? He asked, holding back a laugh as he was dragged through the crowd of gaping kids. The scruffy-looking hobo that Izuku knew as his uncle Shota dragged him through UA's halls, Nato having been let go.
The walls were a pretty blue trimmed with white and every so often, the pair passed enormous doors that were no doubt classrooms. Aizawa didn't let Izuku go until they arrived and entered a large conference room. Several grinning and heaving with laughter heroes were seated around the table.
A small, white-furred mammal was sitting at the head of the circular table, a sharp smile and excitement brewing on his face and in his beady black eyes. Principal Nezu, Izuku nodded at the mammal cordially, his face setting back to his default neutral.
The mammal's smile widened. Well, That was a sight to witness today, Nezu chirped.
Mom said you wouldn't mind, and I'm not trying to get into UA, so it doesn't matter if I'm punished for the stunt I pulled, but Nato, Monoma was pulled in by me and Mom and is not to be held accountable for his actions, he said, and heard shocked sputtering at the admission. Not trying to get into UA? But it is All Might's old school, shouldn't you be eager to attend UA? Asked a tall, pencil-thin skeleton man with piercing blue eyes and long, bright blonde hair. Izuku scoffed and rolled his eyes. How full of himself could the #1 hero be? Who cares where All Might went to school? I plan on going to Ketsubutsu with my mom, and besides, Uncle Sho would never let me pull a single prank. Izuku pulled a face. He heard a groan and felt an ice melting, flower withering glare turn on him, his quirk fading away. Grounded. Aizawa hissed. You are grounded until the end of time, now sit down quietly, while I work. The underground hero ordered, dragging Izuku over to a free chair and depositing the short boy on it. Izuku felt his quirk return and the capture weapon unravel itself from around his waist. Izuku shrugged again and set his bag down, pulling out a book and opening it. He saw several heroes start in surprise and realized he was still wearing his blindfold and veil.
Sitting around the conference table were heroes Izuku knew well, Midnight, Snipe, Ectoplasm and Powerloader among them. Screens and cameras were plastered all around the room, most likely to keep an eye out for cheaters during the written exam and to score the practical.
Sho, are you going to give them an explanation? Izuku heard Hisashi ask with a grin and decided to pipe up himself, Aizawa scowling into his capture weapon. Hi, I'm Fukukado Izuku. I've known Uncle Zashi and Uncle Sho since I was 5.
Fukukado Emi, otherwise known as the Smile Hero, M's joke adopted me when I was 10. Eraserhead's my favorite hero and my quirk is called Earthbending. It's an earth manipulation quirk with a sensory aspect to it, too. Yes, I'm blind and yes, I can see, thank you very much. I like playing jokes and pranks on people and I want to be a hero, but I don't want to go to UA. Is that sufficient enough? Izuku addressed Hisashi, who grinned and flashed a thumbs up at him as they left the other heroes to decipher all of that.
Midnight hit a snort of laughter, disguising it as a cough, and Izuku shot her a discreet smile. You're still grounded, Aizawa grumbled, glaring at them. I know, but look, everyone else is more relaxed, aren't they? Izuku pointed out. True enough, Fukukado-kun. Nezu spoke up, positively beaming at him. Please call me Izuku. Fukukado's too long, for my liking. Izuku made a face. Aizawa waved his hand tiredly at Izuku and continued glaring at him.
Shush you, I said sit quietly. Izuku saluted him mockingly and returned to his book, while the written exams commenced on the screen before them. The written exam passed quickly, Izuku's attention firmly on his book and completely ignoring the mutterings of the heroes and pens and pencils scratching on paper.
He ignored Aizawa's glares that became less and less heated, and he ignored Nezu's intrigued glances at him. None of the others in the room were too subtle about their interest in him, either, considering their focus should have been on the examinees in the auditorium, currently taking the exam.
It didn't take too much longer for Izuku to get fed up.
Shouldn't you all be paying the examinees more attention than you've been paying me? He asked mildly, not taking his attention off of his book. Using his sight, he saw most of the heroes start, heard Hisashi snigger and Aizawa sigh, and felt the look of hunger on Nezu's face. How? Powerloader whispered, baffled. Izuku snorted at the question. Did you miss the part where I told you I've known Uncle Sho and Uncle Zashi since I was 5? Who do you think trained me when I said I wanted to be a hero? To be fair, listener, you also said you were Emi's son. Hisashi grinned. Izuku made a noise of understanding, then tipped his head in a so-so motion.
Okay, that makes more sense, but she taught me more how to throw people off completely than how to fight or use my quirk, or anything like that, really. It's thanks to Mom I can pull off an outfit as stupid as this one and not feel an ounce of shame, he gestured to himself calmly.
Yes, and you're both grounded. Aizawa bit out. From training or from hanging out with Hito-chan?
Both. Aizawa glared at him with his quirk activating. Izuku turned to Hisashi. Uncle Zashi, could you help me train? He asked with puppy dog eyes shining at the hero.
Of course, listener. No, Zashi, that's what grounding is. Aizawa glared at his husband and Izuku, both who merely grinned back at him, showing zero remorse whatsoever. Sorry to interrupt, very sorry, this is hilarious. The written exam has ended, Eraserhead, present Mike. The examinees have an hour for lunch, then it's time for the practical exam. Are you prepared, Mike? Midnight cut in with a smirk. Hizashi smirked back. Ready as I'll ever be, he replied.
Izuku really did not trust that phrase. He knew they were absolutely planning something, he just hoped it was good and not all around embarrassing. He wondered how Nei-chan, Kyo-chan and Hito-chan were doing, hoping they'd all pass.
Unless you were talking technically, none of them had very physical quirks, nothing bright or flashy like the other examinees. Izuku knew they could do it, though, he knew they could.
His mom and uncles were the ones who trained them, and mom, Uncle Sho and Uncle Zashi were nothing if not thorough when training. His friends had even had him show them a few earthbending moves they could potentially use against both robots and people, but Izuku had hesitated on that one. Robots were tough. If they used earthbending moves without the earth, he knew they'd break something, but he showed them a few simple moves and had them practice the stomp kick clap combo until they could all do it on instinct.
That had, admittedly, taken a while. It was simple, sure. Stomp on the ground to spook the opponent, kick out shallowly to get them to give you a bit of space, then step forward into theirs and clap your hands around their heads to immobilize them. Kyo-chan and Hito-chan asked him why making space was necessary when they'd be charging in to immobilize them, but Izuku pointed out that, if you wanted to run away and pull the sequence of right, you'd have the space to run away while also having an opponent who wasn't sure if he should follow you.
His style was aggressive, he knew that. It was fast, aggressive and low to the ground so he could feel and sense around him properly, but he wasn't limited to the ground.
His situation was a lot different than Toph's, and since he could still see, for lack of a better definition, off the ground, dodging high was less of an issue. It had taken a while to learn how to work around less sharp senses while in the air, but he'd worked through them, no problem. Izuku didn't move from his seat as the examinees moved from the written testing halls to an auditorium where present Mike was waiting in the wings. He's going to be over the top, get no response, then be disappointed throughout the rest of the presentation, isn't he? Izuku noted with a sigh. Aizawa snorted with a grin hidden in his capture weapon. That's exactly what would happen with his loudmouth husband. Congratulations. You've figured out the secrets of Yamada Hizashi, he smirked. Izuku rolled his eyes. His Uncle Sho was so weird sometimes. Oh please, you knew I'd be more like you than him since I first asked you how to, friend. He deadpanned at the underground hero, both of them ignoring the incredulous stares of the other teachers. He was 10, all right? Asking that was completely natural. Oh my gosh, there's 2 of them, he heard a muffled voice groan. Vlad King, the blood hero.
Izuku hadn't actually met him before, but now that he had, he and Aizawa turned sharp grins on him and he shivered in fear.
Be afraid, they chorused, be very, very afraid.
Shota, Izuku, stop scaring Khan and the other teachers, Hizashi scolded them as he slumped into the room.
He wore a pout and sounded vaguely like a disappointed parent. He was still wearing the disappointment from the physical exam presentation on his face, and it showed. Izuku sighed, staring at the voice hero blandly. We told you, Uncle Zashi. In a room full of nervous kids about to take an exam, no one's going to respond to an over-enthusiastic question, he said. Aizawa nodded with him and Hizashi's pout deepened. He didn't agree, it seemed.
I was only trying to lighten the mood, he complained, loudly. It didn't work much, did it? Aizawa snorted at his husband. That's not the point, Sho. Hizashi whined loudly, as Izuku and Aizawa heaved matching sighs and leveled matching deadpan stares at him.
They ignored the whispers of, help. There really are 2 Eraserheads, in favor of watching the practical unfold. Hizashi screamed. Go. To them, and Izuku smirked at the monitors when he noticed only Kyoka, Hitoshi and Nato ran into the mock cities. There were 4 of them, labeled, unhelpfully, testing sites, A, B, C, and D. His friends had been split up between them and he would have been in the 4th, but his little stunt with his mom and Nato meant he didn't have to take the exam. Whoopee. The robots roamed the streets, and from what Izuku could see, each testing site only held about 250 robots each. With almost 1,000 examinees, it was a first-come, first-served sort of basis. In the context of UA and Hero School exams in general, it was actually a pretty good test, or it would be if it didn't cater so heavily towards physical quirks. His friends were all running through the streets of the mock cities that were the testing sites and were well ahead of their fellow examinees, thank goodness.
The cutoff was 40 points, considering only 36 examinees made it to the hero course through the practical exam. The last 4 entered through recommendations, and the 40 in total students were split between the hero course. 20 went into 1A, Aizawa's homeroom, and the other 20 into 1B, Vlad King's homeroom. It wasn't like one class was better than the other, the students in 1A were just featured more, remembered better.
Izuku was sure it was the teacher in charge of the different classes, not the classes themselves. Vlad focused a little too much on the rivalry between 1A and 1B, while Aizawa actually put work into making sure his class feared him and that his class would obey him completely.
It, admittedly, wasn't the best tactic, but it ensured Aizawa's students wouldn't ignore his orders in a crisis. Of course, it always meant he wasn't the most favorite teacher on staff, but Aizawa was a teacher, he wasn't participating in a popularity contest.
Izuku watched the screens with half-hearted interest, not really caring about most of the action. More than half the examinees were going to fail, so what was the point? Then he saw them. On the same screen. Izuku stared. Hey, Uncle Sho? He asked quietly, his eyes firmly rooted on the screen before him. Who are they? He breathed, his eyes wide. Aizawa glanced at the screen Izuku was fixated on, then grinned impishly. Izuku didn't see it, not wanting to miss the sight before his eyes. Why do you want to know? He inquired slyly. An airbender and a waterbender, right before my eyes, Uncle Sho. Who are they? Izuku emphasized with a hard tone.
2 boys on screen were devastating robots left and right, one wielding water with a scowl on his face and the other blowing them to bits, surrounded by air currents. He wore a grin, as if he enjoyed the destruction, but Izuku didn't care about that. He could see their elements, shining as bright as the sun, but even if his attention had been captured by them, he couldn't feel anything from them.
Maybe his dreams were wrong. Maybe the stories running through his mind every night, the words and the memories haunting his dreams, of both the past and the future, were just that, dreams and stories. Izuku shook his head, tearing himself away from their screen and moving on, trying to find his sister, friend and crush. The exam continued on like that for a while, robots crushed here, robots destroyed there, a careless examinee saved here and there, when a low chuckle caught Izuku's attention. Well, 2 minutes left. Are you ready, Mike? Nezu, the principal of UA asked, and Hisashi nodded, almost jumping up and down with excitement. Izuku leaned over to Aizawa. Ready for what? He whispered, feigning disinterest. Aizawa only smirked. You'll see, he replied cryptically, turning his attention back to the screens, and Izuku's followed. Izuku glanced at the screens, slightly confused, then his eyes widened. I really hope you lot know what you're doing, Izuku hissed, whipping his head around to glare at Aizawa. On screen, 4 enormous robots appeared, taller than the mock buildings in the cities and twice as wide, crushing everything in its path. 1 for each mock city, Izuku knew. His friends were in there with them, Kyo-chan, Hito-chan and Nei-chan. They better be safe.
Of course we know what we're doing, a tall, skeleton-looking blonde with a sunken face and long bright blonde hair scoffed, folding his arms. Izuku growled at him. I don't care whether you think you have this under control. I want to know you're in control, because if my friends, my sister and her boyfriend and my best friend get hurt, I'll be coming after you with all the wrath of All Might himself. Izuku hissed, a serious glare darkening his face.
Many of the teachers shifted in their seats, fidgeting. Calm down, listener. I promise no one's going to get hurt beyond a few scrapes and bruises. Hisashi laid a gentle hand on his honorary nephew's soft green curls.
I know, Uncle Zashi, but what idiot thought this was a good idea? Robots cater to people with physical quirks, meant for people like me with strong offensive powers. It's not made for people like Kyo-chan and Hito-chan. They have a mental quirk and an ear mutation quirk. How's that going to help against robots? It's silly and biased, he huffed. I've been saying that for years, Izuku, but it's not up to us or even Nezu. The commission wants strong daylight heroes, investigation heroes and undergrounders like me aren't as valued to them, so practical exams of successful hero schools are made for physical quirks and the fittest and smartest others, Aizawa grumbled. It wasn't fair at all, but that's how it went. Stupid corrupt hero public safety commission, Izuku frowned, his eyes flicking over to Nezu. When are you going to destroy them and take over power, Rat King? We all know you can, he remarked, to almost all of the heroes' horror. Nezu smirked at him and Aizawa snorted, amused. Soon, Fukukado-kun, I am merely biding my time and waiting for the opportune moment. The principal's eyes flashed with anticipation and Izuku found himself grinning.
Oh Uncle Sho, I like him. Izuku grinned ferally at Nezu. I knew you would, Aizawa huffed, rolling his eyes, but hiding a smile in his capture weapon.
Shota, stop corrupting the baby, Hazashi cut in with a frustrated pout.
Izuku and Aizawa stared at him blandly. Where did that come from?
Baby, they asked incredulously. Hazashi nodded confidently.
He's the precious baby, the voice hero declared. Izuku and Aizawa wore matching deadpans.
He's 14, Hazashi, Aizawa told him, unimpressed. I'm about to start high school, Izuku added plainly. You're still the precious baby boy. Hitoshi too, our baby, Hazashi grinned cheekily.
Uncle Sho, you married him. Izuku turned to stare at Aizawa. I did, Aizawa sighed, nodding. He didn't know where his husband got it from.
Why him? Izuku groaned, pointing at Hazashi. The blonde's lips twitched and the rest of the staff had to hide grins and smiles. This was by far the most amusing interaction they'd witnessed all day, and there were so many memorable moments to choose from.
Remember Izuku, when an extrovert adopts an introvert.
They have no choice in the matter. I know, Izuku interrupted, ignoring that.
That is not how friendship works, you two, and you know it, from Hazashi. Apply it to feelings, emotions. They both shivered, then snickered at each other. They really got along like a house that set itself on fire. Maybe this was why Hazashi refused to leave them alone together.
And you end up with a loud blonde husband. Beware the blondes, Izuku, beware. Aizawa warned him in the deadest tone of voice he could muster. A quiet snort had Izuku's and Aizawa's eyes shooting over to the other staff, Midnight, Powerloader, Vlad King and Snipe all trying and failing to hide their laughter and shaking shoulders. Aizawa-kun, if I didn't know how utterly in love you were with Hazashi, I would have asked if Izuku was your secret love child. Nezu chirped as Izuku and Aizawa choked at the confession.
Hazashi chuckled, turning his attention back to the exam he was meant to be officiating, when a loud explosion went off in Mach City C and all eyes swung to its corresponding screen, just in time to see the fireworks coming out of the giant zero-point robot, lighting up the sky. Izuku stared. That was Nito's exam site. Without thinking, Izuku fled the viewing room, dashing through the halls. He was desperate to find him. Nato better be okay, otherwise he was going to kill someone. Izuku rushed towards the Mach cities used for the exam, using his quirk to move himself faster than the buses and dashing inside it as quickly as he could.
The city was pretty much in ruins, buildings partially destroyed, robots laying on their sides, smoking and on fire, the streets and concrete torn to pieces, but Izuku couldn't have cared less. He had to find Nito. He ran through the streets, searching desperately with his quirk to find the boy he'd grown so fond of. He raced past the examinees, stopping a few times to help out the few who couldn't seem to help themselves, but continued making his way towards where his best friend and crush of a few years most likely was. Nito always was drawn to dramatics and theatricality, and explosions counted as just that.
Izuku used his quirk as best as he could, actively expanding out his area of influence so he could sense more, hear more, feel more than anything he could with his usual abilities.
There, Izuku gritted his teeth, he'd found Nito.
Izuku ran through the torn-up streets, ignoring collapsed and caved buildings and the decimated robots laying about everywhere, and made his way directly towards the large pillar of smoke rising into the air. He ran and jumped and slid past robots, rubble and other examinees, until the person he'd been searching for came into view. kneeling in front of the giant robot on fire. Relief flooded through him. Nato was okay.
"Nei-chan," he yelled, practically bulldozing through the examinees crowded around the blonde, a brunette and a built boy with blue hair and engines in his calves. Nito looked unhurt, for the most part, and was largely pleased to see Izuku, the blind boy, running towards him frantically.
"Nato. You're okay. For the love of time itself, I swear if you scare me like that again you're sleeping on the couch the rest of our lives," he yelled, tackling the boy in a tight hug. Izuku heard Nato cackling in his ear and pulled back, confused. Was the robot? "Nei-chan. Did you do something to make the robot explode? You know I can't exactly see the goings-on of the sky and stuff," he frowned at the smirking blonde. "Wait, that's..." The brunette whipped her head around to stare at Izuku, but Nato shushed her. "Quiet, witness, for today you shall view history," Nato declared, and Izuku groaned. "Nei-chan, do you have to be so dramatic all the time?"
"But of course, my beloved. I believe this moment deserves a flare of fancy," Nito told him. He pushed away from Izuku, reaching into his tracksuit pocket to pull out a small, black box.
Izuku could only stare at his crush's ludicrous thoughts. "Please don't tell me you're, my dearest Izuku-kun."
Nito interrupted with a grin, getting down on one knee and holding up the box like it was a precious artifact. "You captivated my attention from the moment you first performed on my stage. You played my heartstrings in time with your heartbeat, and I want to take this time now to ask you if you would have me for the rest of eternity, captivate my soul and continue playing the perfect melody of our hearts," he said softly, Izuku's eyes opening up wide.
Did Nato? Why? You share my affections? Truly? Izuku whispered, hating the fact his heart was pounding. His face was flushing and his palms were sweating. Oh no. Izuku watched Nato open the black box, revealing a lovely silver chain and the most beautiful pendant. His name was written out in cursive on top of a crest with all 4 elements represented. Nato dug into his tracksuit and pulled out a necklace similar to Izuku's slung about his neck, with his name on it instead. It wasn't their real names, though, it was their proposed hero names, and Izuku felt his heart burst with happiness at the sight of it.
Nito wanted him. Izuku gulped and slowly turned to the camera that had been watching the event play out.
"Uncle Sho," he began slowly, "I have fallen in love with a loud blonde. Does the rule still apply here?" he asked, and a little red light on the camera blinked red. "Repeat after me, Izuku," came the slow voice of Aizawa. "You do not
have a choice in the matter." "I understand," Izuku sighed.
"For the last time, you two, that is not how relationships, friendships or otherwise, work," Hizashi screeched into the camera. He was promptly ignored. So was the whispered, "Was that present Mike?" He turned to Nato, the boy grinning as he held the box aloft in the air, and Izuku shook his head with a small smile. "Was the explosion really necessary?" he asked, feigning disgruntlement. "No, but it made for great entertainment," Nato smirked.
Izuku groaned and helped Nito to his feet, the blonde boy helping the brunette pull the necklace around his neck.
"Does this mean you accept?" Izuku practically felt Nito's emotions swell up and he rolled his eyes. His new boyfriend had to be so dramatic all the time.
"Of course, you dummy. I love you too," he gagged at the end of the sentence, then carried on. "Besides, our aunts and uncles went to such great lengths to get us together, how could I say no? By the way," he turned back to the camera and scowled into it, "one of you better have a better explanation for putting them all in danger, otherwise someone's losing their claws," he growled. He felt Nato take his hand in his and relaxed in an instant. "It was my idea, my beloved, though we forgot your eyes don't have access to the skies above," Nato chuckled softly, caressing his hands ever so gently. Izuku leaned into the touch, sighing softly before a thought reached his mind. "Hey, Nei-chan. Does this mean we're a couple now?" he asked curiously, tilting his head sideways just the slightest bit. Nito smirked happily and, without warning, pulled Izuku into his first ever kiss, taking the usually stoic boy by surprise. Izuku squeaked in shock, then melted into the kiss, Nito's lips soft and warm and oh so hungry against his, devouring his lips. Izuku let him take control, too surprised to do anything but hug Nato back and melt into the kiss. When Nato finally pulled back,
letting Izuku stumble back a few steps. Their hands connected and the rioting crowd all but forgotten at that point. Izuku's face felt hot and red and he tried to put words into place, unable to do anything but stare at Nato.
You, he stuttered, his thoughts crashing about in his head. Nato smirked again, smugly and triumphantly, and Izuku knew it wasn't over yet.
Nato had kissed him. Yes, my beloved? The blonde slowly pulled Izuku into another embrace, one hand slowly roaming down his cheek, the other holding his waist firmly in place. Nei-chan, we're in public, Izuku whispered, his face flaming. The blonde chuckled and let his partner go for the time being. Izuku stumbled back, mumbling a half-hearted "See you after the exam, sunshine," then ran off, passing through the streets and past all the destruction and gaping children in favor of rushing back to Ua, back to the halls and bursting into the viewing room. He ignored all the sniggering adults and fell against Aizawa. "Uncle Sho, help. I think I might have fallen in love with a loud blonde," he groaned. Aizawa petted him on the head and nodded sympathetically. I know, I'd like to say it gets easier, but, sadly, they only get louder," Aizawa sighed. They both ignored the snorts and chuckles of the other teachers in the background and Hizashi's soft mumbling that really carried no heat behind it. It had been the dynamic of the trio for as long as Izuku was smart enough to understand what such an elaborate running joke was. Aizawa nudged Izuku out of thoughts with a swift ruffle of his soft green curls. "The exam's over, kiddo. Go find the other gremlins and head over to the Gyrus with Kyoka. Your mom will pick you up from there," he told him. Izuku nodded with a cheeky salute, dodged a playful swipe from Aizawa and a hug from Hizashi, running out of the viewing room as quickly as he could. He could feel people staring after him, both in amusement and concern. "Be glad he's not applying for Ua, otherwise we'd have all 4 of the problem children and the school would be burnt down before you know it," Aizawa snorted, smirking at his husband. My, Shota-kun, is that a challenge?" Nexu smirked mischievously, paws circling a teacup filled with steaming tea. Hizashi and Aizawa laughed.
"No, sir, it's a fact," Hizashi chortled. "Our son Hitoshi, Jiro Kyoka, Mono Manito and Fukukato Izuku have been friends for most of their lives. They know exactly what the others are thinking and come up with as many schemes as you do. Principal Nezu, with Izuku at the forefront," he said. Nezu hummed in understanding. "And there is no chance he would reconsider." "Not in the slightest, Principal. Ms. Joke works at Ketsubutsu. She's not leaving, either," Aizawa huffed gruffly. Nezu nodded and relaxed back into his chair, only the slightest bit disappointed. He watched the greenette running through the halls on one of his monitors and smiled maniacally to himself.
This year was turning out to be very, very interesting. Izuku didn't stop running. He knew the halls pretty well, he thought, with his senses. The amount of cameras and secret passages Nezu had decided to build within UA's walls was actually ridiculous, though, and the vent tunnels. Was Nezu a secret agent, or a spy or something? "Izuku. Hey, over here." Izuku glanced around him, his pace slowing to a jog as he reached the front doors of the enormous school and saw Kyoka and Hitoshi waiting for him. He grinned and waved at them, then saw Nato and his face exploded into flames. "Dude, your face is red as hell," Kyoka giggled. "He did the explosion robot proposal thing, didn't he?" Hitoshi smirked. It was a replica of his dad's. Aizawa's smirk and Izuku glared at them.
"That's not it. He kissed me," Izuku hissed, then buried his head in his hands. "In front of so many people," he whined.
His friends cackled. Arms slid over Izuku's shoulders and he squeaked in alarm, his quirk having somehow missed his blonde boyfriend's approach. They drew Izuku into the older boy's chest and for once Izuku cursed his fate of being short. "I haven't heard you get shocked by anything since we met. Has my proposal flustered you so?" Nato whispered into his ear and it was all Izuku could do to not shudder.
"Why, you took me by surprise, that is all," he muttered, drawing the veil and his headband down over his face in an attempt to hide the tomato red flush coating his face and ears.
"I hope it was a pleasant one. There will be many more to come if that is so." Izuku could hear the smugness creeping into his voice. "Maybe, maybe not. Stop being so flirty, sunshine, we're in public," Izuku grumbled, wriggling away from Nito's hold on him and moving to his side, taking the blonde's hand in his instead.
Have you guys forgotten we're still standing here? Kyoka's amused voice had their eyes rushing over to her and Hitoshi, the pair smirking, with Kyoka leaning comfortably against the much taller, broader boy. Their hands were also intertwined.
I knew you two were dating, Izuku said plainly, eyeing their connection. What of it, Bush Boy? You and Nei-chan are dating, aren't you? Hitoshi drawled.
Sure, but we've only just begun our epic romance. Yours has been playing out for several months now, hasn't it? And you've gone from gay to bi, so congratulations, my friends, Nito grinned. Kyoka flushed lightly, pouting.
How the heck did you notice that? She complained and Hitoshi laughed, shaking his head at all of them. The examinees hoping to enter UA in April flowed out of the hallowed halls, several openly staring at Izuku. Nato, Hitoshi and Kyoka, who ignored all the eyes as they made their own way out of the school grounds, eager to get to Kyoka's house, or in Izuku's case, his second home, and discuss both their practicals and the romances blooming between all of them. The walk to the train station didn't take too long, nor did the train itself, and within an hour and a half, the four friends burst into the Jiru's home, Kyoka and Nato talking animatedly while Izuku and Hitoshi chilled quietly slightly behind them.
Mika and Cutico let them in easily, greeting each of them warmly, with a quick warning to Hitoshi about not being alone with Kyoka in a room with the doors closed. Nito snickered and Izuku sighed, watching his friends, boyfriend and his honorary aunt and uncle with fondness disguised as long-standing suffering. Mika and Cutico then turned around and caught sight of Izuku, still holding Nito's hand.
Mika's eyes flashed with joy and, dare he say, something sly. My, I see our Kyo and Hitoshi aren't the only two lovebirds in the squad anymore, she grinned. Nato smirked happily, puffing up and drawing Izuku into himself, so that Izuku was facing sideways as Nato smothered him in a hug. The plan worked perfectly, so now my dearest beloved is truly mine, he crowed. Izuku scowled lightly, elbowing Nato to make him let go. Would you stop calling me that in public? He grumbled good-naturedly. You call him, Sunshine, in public. Kyoka smirked as Izuku glared playfully at her. And I thought you were my sister, he grumbled, and she laughed, dragging them all past her parents and into the house. Nato still held Izuku close.
Are you going to let go? He asked gruffly, jerking his arm out of the other boy's grasp.
But, my beloved, I would be broken-hearted if we should ever part. Nato pouted at him and Izuku flinched, straining away from the blonde.
Those eyes were they were too bright. Izuku relented with a sigh, allowing Nito to capture his hand in his. The blonde smirked triumphantly as Hitoshi and Kyoka grinned at them, and they all climbed the stairs to Kyoka's room. Izuku never could say no to Nato, and it was obvious the blonde knew that completely. Hitoshi nudged Kyoka as she led them all into her room, and she grinned back, dragging him to her bed, and they both fell on it, side by side. They heard Nito sit on her squeaky desk chair and, with the groan from Izuku, guessed Nito had pulled Izuku onto his lap. They hid their sniggers and sat up, grinning at the two.
So how'd the exam go? I hope Uncle Sho didn't stop you from taking the exams at all. Kyoka began, after they'd all had enough of playing with each other and goofing off. Nato let Izuku slide off his lap, but the greenette stayed close, sitting down on the floor and leaning next to the chair instead. Izuku shrugged, gesturing to his outfit.
He rounded me up with his capture weapon and deposited me beside him in the viewing room with the other teachers. Did you know they were watching the exams? That's how they awarded points. He was annoyed with me at first, then we had fun messing with the other teachers. We had a great time. Vlad King thought I was Uncle Sho's kid, though, that was fun. He grinned and his friends rolled their eyes, but Nito urged him to continue. I watched you guys for a bit, then I saw something really crazy. He leaned forward excitedly. I saw an airbender and a waterbender, he whispered brightly, grinning so widely he was almost beaming. Kyoka jerked up and stared at him, her eyes wide in surprise.
Seriously? Water and air at the same time? Are you serious? She questioned him quickly, almost unbelieving of his statement. Izuku nodded enthusiastically. I know, I couldn't believe my eyes either. Uncle Sho wouldn't tell me who they were, though, he grumbled, but the light was still there. They actually did seem a lot like the originals. The airbender was so full of fun, and I bet he's a real airhead and passionate, but not the smartest, and I bet the waterbender's super reliable and intelligent, and don't even get me started on their control and powers. Kyo-chan, you have to tell me all about them if they're in your class. Izuku grinned, eyeing his sister as she laughed and nodded.
2 more benders came into play, and Izuku was excited, sure, but what did it mean that they were all gathering now, that they were all rising up now?
Something didn't feel right to Izuku, and something told Izuku his first year of high school would be anything but peaceful. It was a nerve-wracking week that followed in the wake of the exam. Aizawa and Hizashi weren't speaking of it in the slightest, and it drove Hitoshi and Kyoka crazy. Nato wasn't affected, or so it seemed on the outside.
Not even the unflappable performer could have been completely free of panic. Izuku could tell he was shaken by the weight, if not by the way he insisted on being even more dramatic than he usually was, then by the way he couldn't sit still at all. His parents found him exhausting, Kyoka found him irritating, and Hitoshi found him exhausting, so, as was natural, apparently, he was pushed onto Izuku and forced to endure his clinginess from there. It was cute, if Izuku was being honest. Nito not being able to sit still meant they could go out to places and enjoy each other's company. It wasn't quite what he pictured a date to be like. Then again, Aizawa and Hitoshi always insisted their own dates with their own loves took place in cat cafes and vintage music shops, so it wasn't all that strange.
At least museums and theater performances were somewhat quiet and dark, which allowed them a moment together, even in the crowd. Izuku had no problems with Nato dragging him out to take his anxiety out on whatever activity he had his heart set on, but did it have to always include crowds of people? Izuku allowed it, of course, but he made it clear to Nato that the next time they went out on a date, he would be picking the activity. Nato didn't bother protesting, only beaming at Izuku and dragging him out to yet another performance.
But the week of waiting was well spent, Izuku thought, and all too soon Nato, Kyoka and Hitoshi were running into the Jiro's house, waving their letters in the air frantically. Izuku rolled his eyes and sighed, but allowed himself to be dragged to the couch.
Okay. Who's going first? Kyoka asked nervously. Paper, scissors, rock it out, honestly, Izuku muttered, earning 2 slaps to the back of the head from Hitoshi and Kyoka. Nato perked up and beamed at him. That would be best, wouldn't it? Izuku deadpanned at his boyfriend's cheer, ignoring his best friend's sniggers. Sunshine, that was sarcasm, Izuku sighed, his lips twitching. I know, he grinned triumphantly. Izuku nudged him with a frown. Just open the letter, Sunshine, Izuku groaned. Guys? We're right here, you know. Kyoka sniggered. Izuku rolled his eyes and they all watched as Nato tore open his envelope. A smooth, round disc fell out. They stared at it. Greetings, I am here. Hologram All Might popped out of the disc yelling his signature catchphrase with his signature smile. MONOMANEITO. You passed the written exam within the top 20% of all examinees with a score of 78%. Congratulations. Now for the practical. You earned 35 villain points, but that, unfortunately, is not enough to pass.
Nato lost his smile at the declaration, but All Might wasn't finished yet. Which is why you will be glad to know villain points are the only points that are awarded to examinees, rescue points. In total, young MONOMA, 35 rescue points. You have passed at 3rd place with 70 total points and have earned a spot in Class 1A. This is your Hero Academia. Hologram All Might declared proudly, then the hologram shut off and silence remained.
Oh my gosh, does he have to be so loud? Izuku groaned, rubbing his sensitive ears. Kyoka grimaced, removing her own hands from her ears. I really hope we don't have to do that again, she said, eyeing her envelope warily. Hitoshi said nothing, but slumped further onto the couch tiredly.
What happened to peace and quiet? Does he not know what an inside voice is?
Are we forgetting the part in which I placed 3rd? Unbelievable. And from my own beloved, too. Nato screeched, jumping up from the couch and pouting at his friends. Izuku chuckled, grinning at the playfully enraged Nato. Kyoka shook her head with a smile and Hitoshi managed a thumbs up. Nato huffed, but smiled back and sat down, the tension dissipating out of him as he leaned against Izuku. "Okay. I'm opening mine next," Kyoka called and opened her own envelope. The same round disc fell out and they all stared at it, again, until the hologram opened up.
They all breathed a sigh of relief. "What's up, listener? How are you doing today? I'm Present Mike and I'm here to deliver your exam results. Can I get an, oh yeah?" Kyoka deadpanned at the hologram of her loud voice uncle while the others laughed at Present Mike's predictability.
"I can't believe he put that in a video," Kyoka groaned. Izuku snickered, then they all fell silent to allow the video to continue playing. As you know, the exam was split up into two parts, the written and the practical exams. Well, good news for ya, you passed the written exam with flying colors at a whopping 85%.
Hologram Mike cheered and Kyoka smirked. "Nailed it.
On to the practical. 30 points isn't enough to get you into the hero course, I'm afraid, but what kind of school would we be if we judged you on villain points alone?"
Juro Kyoka, 35 rescue points, 4th total in the practical exam. Beside Present Mike, a hologram video of Kyoka looking out for and helping the other participants played and she blushed lightly at the praise. She wanted to be a hero, what else was she going to do? "Welcome to Class 1A of the Hero course, this is your Hero Academia." Present Mike flashed her finger guns in a wink, then the hologram switched off. "I did it, I passed," she cheered, jumping up from the couch and onto Hitoshi in her excitement. "Kyo, seriously, what the hell?" the tired purple boy wheezed, shoving Kyoka off him.
"I passed, Hito. Guys, I did it." She laughed happily. Nato smirked at her. "Indeed, we're in the same class, too." "Oh," Kyoka's eyes widened. "Oh hell yeah." She and Nato cackled madly.
Izuku caught Hitoshi's eye and nodded his head at their cackling partners, rolling his eyes. Hitoshi nodded his agreement and they both shifted closer to each other, intent on getting the hologram messages over and done with.
Hitoshi's hologram message was by far the best, they both thought, with Eraserhead delivering the results. He did so quickly and with stunning efficiency, not wasting time with greetings or pleasantries, and it was a nice change of pace.
"Shinso Hitoshi, you passed the written exam with 77%, congratulations.
You had less luck in the practical, with only 33 villain points, but, as I'm sure you're aware of this already, that wasn't the only thing you were graded on. You were awarded 44 rescue points for your heroic deeds, with a grand total of 77 points, putting you in first equal place. Welcome to Class 1A. This is your Hero Academia." Eraserhead drawled, then the hologram shut off. Izuku patted Hitoshi on the back and Hitoshi sighed deeply. "I came first. All I wanted to do was pass," he groaned. Izuku nodded sympathetically.
There Hitoshi, it'll be okay," he crooned softly. Hitoshi scowled at him and shoved him off the couch.
"Be okay? Seriously? This is not what I thought would happen," he groaned loudly. "Wait. Did you open your results without us?" Kyoka screeched loudly, glaring at them.
"You were busy planning Uncle Sho's murder and the collapse of UA from within, so," Izuku shrugged, smirking. Kyoka glared at him, before launching herself at Hitoshi and wrestling the hologram disc off of him so she could listen to it herself.
It was amusing, Izuku had to admit, watching his sister's emotions flicking over her face. "Kyo-chan, you will always be a revolving door of expressions," he chuckled, once she'd finished watching the recording. Nato sidled up next to Izuku, capturing him in a side hug, and Izuku melted into the warmth of his dramatic sunshine. "You came in first equal?" Kyoka shrieked at him, turning on Hitoshi with a betrayed look on her face. With good old Kachan no less, Izuku rolled his eyes with a snort. He's not going to be happy. "How do you manage that without an offensive quirk and no support items?" she pouted. "Dad and Pops have both been training me, and Dad excels at weaponless combat. He's a threat even without his support items." Hitoshi shrugged, avoiding her judgmental gaze.
"What class are you in?" Nito asked with a smile, happy for one of his closest friends. "My insomniac ass got put in the same class as the rest of you morons. Let's burn the school down already," he snapped, but it lacked any bite and instead made Kyoka and Nito cheer in delight. Izuku groaned and fell back onto the couch. "Great, they've corrupted you two now.
Why can't my friends be normal instead of chaos-loving gremlins? He shot them a smirk. Izuku, you're a chaos-loving gremlin, Kyoka deadpanned at him.
Only because of Mom. It's hard to stay sane when your mom's a hero who literally beats villains up with rubber animals, he snickered, shrugged, and the others paused.
You know what? That's fair, Hitoshi nodded with a sigh.
I doubt we'd turn out any different, Nito agreed. You have a point, I guess, Kyoka grumbled out. The three of them sighed, and for a time, it was quiet. Then,
Zuzu, I'm here to pick you up. Ready for your exam tomorrow? Emi hollered into the house. Seriously, Mom? Tone it down, Izuku yelled back.
No shouting in the house, both of you. Mika called out from the kitchen, smiling as she brandished a cleaver in the air. Hey Emi, here to pick up Izuku.
Thanks for looking after my baby Zuzu. Emi put on a crap-eating grin and directed it at Izuku, who rolled their eyes at her as his friends snickered at the nickname. Baby Zuzu. That fits, Kyoka sniggered, nudging Izuku lightly. The nickname suits you well, my dove, Nato crooned with a smirk. Shut up, sunshine, Izuku shoved him carefully. Hitoshi simply smirked at him. I'm not saying anything, but you owe me for it, he grinned.
This is what I get for falling in friendship and love, he groaned, jumping up off the couch. He picked up his bag and strolled over to Emi, giving her the stink eye as she grinned at him.
Izuku waved goodbye to his friends and walked off with Emi right beside him, scowling at her all the while. She just kept on humming, grinning and skipping, unashamed. Did you have to use that nickname around my friends? Of course I did. As your mother, it is my duty to embarrass you around your friends. It's mandatory, she chirped happily. No, you seriously did not need to do that. Is this how it's going to be at school? He wondered out loud.
Maybe, maybe not, Emi grinned, getting into the car. Izuku did the same, glancing at her.
What's that supposed to mean, Mom? He asked, curiosity seeping into his tone of voice. I don't know, you'll just have to find out, she said cryptically as she reversed out of the Girou's driveway. Izuku groaned again. Was this his mom's way of telling him he'd have to wait and see? For the record, I cannot wait for tomorrow to be over, he sighed. Don't worry, Zuku. The smirk faded into the smallest of grimaces. I'm not looking forward to all the marking, either, she sighed. That night, Izuku spent the time wide awake and jittering. He was nervous and excited all at once, a hungry smile wanting to devour the exam taking place the next day. He had no clue what it was going to be, only that there was a written and a practical exam, just like UA's exam. He didn't know anything about what he was walking into the next morning. Emi hadn't told him a thing, nor had she let him search up the practical online since his mom worked there and was his mother at the same time. He was going into this completely blind, pun intended, he snickered to himself. He hadn't worn the white duck blindfold to the UA exams as he promised his sister he wouldn't, but nothing was stopping him from wearing it to Ketsubutsu's exams. He knew his mom wouldn't mind in the slightest. She'd actually find it hilarious, if he knew her properly, and he did. He was going to enjoy the exams, if he was being honest. He hadn't been looking forward to fighting robots in UA's exams, it would have been way too easy. Izuku wasn't going to say he had perfect control over his quirk, because he didn't. At best his control was solid and at worst it was fine, but he still had some problems with finite manipulation of the Earth. He struggled with getting it to perfectly go where he wanted to and in the right shape. Cones and spirals of Earth were all right and squares and rectangles he had no problem with, but it was the more complex shape he struggled with, six-pointed stars, for instance. It wasn't like other people didn't struggle with control too, it was just that it seemed extra hard for him to get down. Izuku sighed and felt his smile dim. This was probably just another facet of his quirk, since he never saw Toph doing anything like that either. He knew there was no way he'd be able to perfect his quirk with only a decade of having it. Less than that, even, but why did it have to be so hard? He knew having a strong quirk meant it would be harder to master, but still, did it have to be so hard? And just like that, his confidence began to drain away. Sure, he'd been trained by heroes, but did he have what it took to pass a hero exam? Should he have tried to get into UA instead of fooling around so he had some security? He didn't know. Izuku sighed quietly and closed his eyes. He had a big day coming up and he wanted to be ready for it. Rise and shine, baby Zuzu. Today's the big day. Izuku woke up to party poppers, streamers and his mother in his room. His eyes opened and the first thing he saw was all the decorations that filled his room, then his mother, who looked as ecstatic as his room.
"Mom, what are you doing?" he asked dryly because honestly, shouldn't all this be saved for if he passed? Emmy flicked his forehead. "Ow, what did you do that for?" he grumbled at her as she sighed, hands on hips.
"You're doubting yourself, aren't you? How could you know that?" he shot back. She smiled and chuckled. "Because mothers have intuition other people will never have. We need it to stop our children from making reckless decisions." "Mom, you're the epitome of recklessness," Izuku deadpanned. "So I need to stop my son from becoming like me," she grinned, winking at him. "I can't believe you're my mother," he sighed, but couldn't help the smile forming on his face. He got out of bed and Emmy patted him on the head roughly and skipped out of his room to get breakfast ready for them so Izuku could get ready. He had the perfect outfit for the day. Emmy helped him pick it out, which meant it was both practical and practically ridiculous, but hey, he was Emmy's son after all. Who didn't like a bit of ridiculousness to brighten up a day? The outfit in question was a half-sleeved, high-collared, tight-fitting crop top, black in color and a light gray choker around his neck with a white pendant sitting on his neck.
His pants were low-cut on his waist, gray and wide, billowing longs gathered with a silver band at the ankles with a tight criss-cross belt holding it up. That with his white duck blindfold and a black sleeveless leather jacket made up his outfit.
His long green hair was tied up with, not a hair tie, but, you guessed it, a black and gray braided cord. He stepped out of his bedroom and joined Emmy at the breakfast table.
She took one look at her son and cackled, making Izuku smile.
"They're going to know as soon as you walk into the gates that you're my son," she smirked.
"Who cares? I want to be a hero. Go to school and have fun doing it. Letting the teachers know I'm your son is going to give such exciting reactions," he grinned.
Emmy cackled as they ate and after a quick breakfast Emmy readied herself in her hero uniform and Izuku readied his shoulder bag with the things he thought he might need. His pencil case, a few books, a change of clothes he wasn't going to use and a water bottle. He met Emmy by the door and they left the house together. Izuku slipped into the passenger seat of their car and Emmy got into the driver's seat. They careened out of the driveway and whirled down the streets crazily, going faster than the speed limit, but not actually breaking it, somehow. Izuku, used to his mother's crazy driving, just sat back with one of his books and relaxed. The drive didn't take more than 15 minutes, but to Izuku, who was nervous and trying to hide it, it felt like a minute in a whirlwind before Emmy had parked a block away from the school. Emmy had decided to let Izuku have his big day and she'd slip over the rooftops and vents, to the staff rooms, then onto whatever she had to do for the exams that day. Izuku slid out of the car quietly, his small stature and general quietness helping him avoid the majority of attention until he was far enough away from the car so Emmy could get out and get to work. Even at 7:30 in the morning, the blocks were buzzing with kids all dressed in uniform hoping and praying the exams would go well.
Some were tall, some skinny, some with mutations and some as normal as they came, all looking as if hell had swallowed all of their confidence as they passed through Ketsubutsu's gates. They weren't as big as UA's, but they definitely seemed a lot wider. They were wide open, gold, not too tall, but taller by 1.5 than a grown man. The path into the school was paved with red bricks and no, it wasn't bigger than UA's frickin' immense school with all its facilities and hectares, but it was huge enough for the wide, white building, blue-tinted windows, light poles and benches along the path into the school, a white marble fountain glistening in the square in front of the school's front doors. Izuku joined the rush of kids and he wasn't going to lie, they were almost all taller than him and he felt small. And annoyed. All these kids had height, he had smarts. Why couldn't he have both height and smarts? At least he was strong too. His uncles had taught him and so had Toph. He knew her moves, he knew how to fight her style, upfront and aggressive, but he preferred, now that he thought about it, a sneakier fighting style. He wanted to be an underground hero. One who focused on stealth and intelligent takedowns, not publicity and showy, embellished fights that did nothing to keep the public safe. Who the hell's that? A snickering voice brought Izuku out of his thoughts. Here we go, he muttered under his breath.
With all the green around him, his quirk was pretty much at full strength and he let his hearing sharpen. Murmurs filled his ears and not the good kind. He's a shrimp. Is he blind? With that blindfold over his eyes? Not even competition, he won't last a second. One less person to worry about. Move it, shrimp, save taking the test for those of us with actual potential, someone yelled out to him. Izuku ignored them all, ducking and weaving through the crowd without so much as a stumble. If they were counting him out altogether, they weren't even going to pass the first round of the practicals. If they could pass the written exam. When Izuku glanced around with his quirk, he saw haughty, arrogant smirks, confidence seeping off them, and he had to hold back a scoff. Seriously? These people thought he hadn't prepared and worked his ass off just to be here? Most of them looked like they barely had control over their own bodies, much less their quirks. With the crowds and crowds of emotional, hormonal teenagers, not even Izuku and his quirk could examine each and every examinee, and Izuku focused only on the overly arrogant or nervously flustered kids, and as such he missed the rare, calm and collected, quietly nervous ones who held their heads up. It wasn't a mistake, per se, but he definitely regretted it. In front and beside the steps and front doors leading inside the halls of Ketsubutsu Academy were desks set up, 2 of them. 2 teachers to a table for a total of 4 teachers and 4 lines of students lining up to be ID'd and entered into the school exams. Izuku lined up at one of them, not really caring in particular which queue he joined, patiently waiting for his turn, his face as blank as he could make it. His uncle Shota was always saying, "Win in silence, let them think you're losing." And it was solid advice. Whispers and sniggers at how they were sure he wouldn't be competition still rang out around him, and it stung. He knew it did, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise, but he was going to prove them all wrong, so he stayed quiet. He moved slowly through the line. There were so many kids in front of him, when a hand tapped him on the shoulder and he turned around. "Why are you just letting them talk like that about you? Step up and do something about it," a voice whispered quietly to him. "Come on, man. We all know you're better than those losers, so why keep quiet?" Izuku stared at the boys behind him, scowling in disgruntlement. "Asano Itsumi and Kiriko Kamiho, fancy seeing you two here," he replied, his voice stiff. Asano Itsumi had only gotten taller and leaner. He looked fit with broader shoulders, his skin just a little darker than when Izuku saw him last. His pale blonde hair had grown longer and it was swept over to the right, brushing the upper part of his eye, but not covering it. He wore glasses, now, which was a surprise. He had on sneakers and a dark tracksuit. Izuku wanted to bet his quirk had gotten stronger with him. On that note, Izuku noticed a backpack on Asano's back. No doubt it was filled with paper for his quirk. Kiriko had grown too. He was taller than Izuku, but still shorter than Asano, and while just as fit as his friend, looked a lot more muscly than Asano did. His shoulders were broad and his chest wide, his arms thick and his legs, while stumpy, looked powerful. His skin was tanner than Izuku last remembered, his hair a lot longer too. He wore a backpack just like Asano and no longer looked like he was sneering at the world. Come to think of it, Asano didn't look apathetic to everything anymore either, and Izuku wondered what sort of changes the other boy's quirk had made after he left. Midoriya Izuku. Asano's eyes widened. Clearly he hadn't been expecting a reunion either. "It's Fukukado Izuku, actually," he said shortly, keeping his face blank. The last time he saw these two they were bullying him. Izuku didn't bet they had changed. "Fukukado Izuku. Huh, what a change," Kiriko said awkwardly, as if he didn't know how to speak to Izuku. Well, that was nothing new. No one knew what to say to Izuku except his friends, mom, aunts and uncles. "Speaking of changes, aren't you meant to be in uniform?" Asano sniggered, grinning. "It's not mandatory. Besides, I hate my uniform. This is way better." "Is it practical?" Kirito hummed, frowning at the fabric. "Of course it is, Kiriko-kun. I'm the epitome of practicality," Izuku said in monotone. Asano and Kirito stared at him for a moment, then snorted, grins cracking over their faces. "I never took you for a joker, Izuku," Asano chuckled. "What are you talking about? I'm completely serious." He avoided eye contact with them. "Liar." They called him out in unison. That made the corners of Izuku's lips turn up the slightest bit.
The boys grinned and high-fived each other and Izuku rolled his eyes.
Next. The teacher marking their line called and Izuku saw he was next. He scampered up to the teacher and grinned, even as the teacher eyed him up and down with incredulity. Name: Fukukado Izuku. Izuku smirked like the cat who got the cream as the teacher, a big, buff man in full hero uniform, froze. This was the expected reaction. What was not expected was the way the other teachers marking down the examinees froze. All their eyes swung to him in horror and he had to bite his lip to keep from cackling.
Code Red. I repeat, Code Red. Emmy's kid is taking the exam. The man in charge of Izuku's line shrieked into a comms device in his ear, and this time Izuku did cackle.
Fear my reign of terror, he yelled, just to keep the plot point alive, while the teachers rose to their feet in panic and in turn throwing the kids still in line into panic as well. Izuku. What's going on? Asano, eyes wide, nudged him with a poorly concealed smile. My mom's a hero and a teacher at this school, one of the crazy ones. Now her kid's taking the entrance exam. Poor teachers are terrified out of their minds. Izuku laughed happily. He wanted to cause chaos. Chaos is what he caused and he was loving it, until he was plucked off his feet by the collar of his jacket and dangled, face to face, with two more someones he hadn't seen for years.
Kagaya and Kisei. They regarded him with raised eyebrows.
You certainly have changed, kid. I thought we'd have to chase you down to get you to come visit, but here you are. Making a scene. Kagaya told him dryly. Kagaya, Kisei, W. What a surprise, he mumbled awkwardly. After he met them and their charges that one time, he had never gone back, not even when Mika called them up. He couldn't believe they still remembered him. It had been 5 whole years. Surprise is putting it mildly. You didn't visit. The kids were upset. Now you can make it up to them. Kisei's smile was downright terrifying.
Just what kind of trouble have you gotten into since we last saw you, Izuku? Hiriko's voice was high and strangled.
I don't really know how to answer that, Izuku mumbled. Kagaya set him down and both men folded their arms, regarding him with disappointed stares. It took a while for the teachers to calm down and longer for the teachers to calm the examinees down, but that was just how things happened when Izuku was around. He, Asano and Kiriko were admitted into the exam with no problems, into the same exam room, even. That was a surprise to Izuku. He didn't realize just how much his friends had grown up at all until now. He knew Asano and Kiriko as bullies of his childhood self, but they were so much different now.
Well, Izuku thought as he took his own seat in the classroom assigned to him for the written exam, he had changed too. He wondered if Marana was trying to get into Ketsubutsu too and hoped she wasn't. She would try to make his life hell if she did get in. She stood a chance of it, making it in, just like him and Asano and Kiriko. Izuku sat in his own thoughts for the next 10 minutes, quietly thinking and relaxing as the classroom filled with examinees. Once the clock hanging beside the board behind the teacher's podium hit 8:30, a bell rang through the school. A teacher entered the room and the doors shut. He went over exam procedures sternly and thoroughly. Then, once that had all been completed, the written exam began and the room filled with the sound of pencils scratching paper. Izuku listened to the noise for a moment, allowing himself to relax just a little. He opened the paper. Ignoring his own pencil, Izuku felt along the paper and read all the questions before even thinking of writing down answers and, just as he expected, there was the snag. The questions weren't above a third-year middle schooler's level, but they were set for only the smartest. There lay the catch. The questions were slightly insane, but in them were the answers to other questions. Each question in the exam held an answer for another question, written in such a way only the people who were actually searching for the answers would find him. A little smirk graced Izuku's face. This would be a piece of cake. The exam was set for 3 hours. Izuku finished in an hour and a half. Half an hour later, Asano and Kiriko finished up and joined him in the cafeteria. There was an hour's break to rest for the practical, and for lunch, then the practical exam would begin. Izuku couldn't wait. The cafeteria Izuku sat in was wide, large, filled with tables and chairs and was entirely empty, besides the chef. He sat there, at a small, 4-person table in a corner tucked away and hidden from view by a pillar, eating a delicious and nutritious lunch provided free of charge by Ketsubutsu's chef. He sat quietly with lunch and a book in hand, music playing through headphones from his phone as he read and ate. He couldn't help but note the differences. Usually, he ate with Emmy either beside or in front of him, with her own lunch and awful jokes. He was all alone now, none of his friends or Nito, his boyfriend, or his mother with him. It was a feeling he had never really understood. He hadn't felt it since he met Kaori-sensei and his aunts and uncles, Kyoka, Nito and Hitoshi, his mom not the least among them. He didn't have any of them here, it was just him, all alone, and he hated it.
He was lonely. It wasn't an emotion he wanted to feel often, or at all if he could help it. He flipped through the book in his hands, seeing, but not really taking in, the information it provided him, not exactly listening to the music playing in his ears either.
He was zoning out, really, not paying attention to anything, or doing much at all. Couldn't someone relieve himself from the loneliness of the cafeteria? He hoped someone would finish their exams so he wouldn't be so lonely. Oh, hey, look at that. Izuku, hey, he's not replying, murmured a familiar voice. I don't think he's ignoring us, he's probably listening to music, another familiar voice replied. Izuku perked up immediately and slipped the headphones out of his ears, grinning at two familiar figures. He knew these two well, someone must have heard his prayers. Asano-kun, Hiroko-kun. He grinned, waving over to them. He wouldn't have even tried to approach them if they had never approached him first and showed they'd changed. The boys grinned back and beelined to his hidden table, taking a seat beside and before him with ease. Izuku couldn't help but smile widely in their presence. You know it's odd, right? Hiroko said suddenly. Izuku blinked at him, then his eyes widened in understanding and he snorted. That's what he was hinting on. Hilarious. I know. I think it's rather funny, don't you? He smirked at his old bullies turned new friends. You really have changed a lot, you too, he smiled reminiscently. I'd hope so. We were jerks back when we were kids, Hiroko snorted. Our parents heard us with Marana one day, bad-mouthing you and they got really angry. You always were a smart, quiet kid. All the adults loved you and I guess we were jealous because we never got attention the way you did, Asano replied with a bashful smile. They bowed their heads at him, Izuku sighing quietly as they did.
We really are sorry for what happened when we were kids, Izuku. We were young, but that's no excuse as to how we treated you. We cut ourselves off from Marana already, but we never apologized to you, they said sincerely.
Don't worry about it, guys. We were all kids, it's fine, Izuku muttered. He really didn't want them getting into a tizzy about what happened between them when they were all little kids. It was in the past and it didn't matter. We were kids, we said stuff out of emotion, that was it, he said simply.
You said things out of emotion? Asano tried to hide his smile. Izuku, you rarely said anything out of emotion. You were the most emotionless, rational and logical 4-year-old any of us had ever met, Kiriko laughed. Izuku smiled lightly. That did sound like him, didn't it? He went to reply, when a weight rested on his head and a familiar voice rang out with cheer and joy encompassed in it. Hey kiddos, all done with the written stuff already? Must be smarties for that to happen, a female voice laughed heartily. Izuku let out a loud, rough groan. Must you interrupt a heartfelt reunion like that? What kind of woman are you? Does my dear Izu not like the intervention? Ms. Joke smirked, ruffling his hair with a sly grin.
Get off me, you crazy lady, Izuku grumbled, batting her hands away from his face.
She cackled, but waved them goodbye, picking up lunch of his own and left the cafeteria. Kiriko and Asano looked at Izuku with confusion and interest in their eyes at Izuku's not too subtle grin.
Hey Izuku, could you tell us who that was? Asano asked hesitantly. Kirito said nothing, merely nodded eagerly, doing nothing to hide his curiosity. Izuku smirked. Don't tell anyone, but that was Ms. Joke, a hero working as a teacher in this school. She teaches heroics, is a homeroom teacher for 1 year or another, and she's also the English and one of several heroics teachers. And, on top of that, he paused and grinned, she's my adoptive mom.
You're kidding. Asano cried excitedly. No way, you're joking. Kiriko groaned excitedly, both of them grinning like madmen. Izuku frowned at their excitement. Not many people actually knew of Ms. Joke, the Smile Hero. So to think his new friends not only knew of, but were fans of his mother were rare to come across.
You know my mother, like, know her career, know her. He replied with his own question, a grin of his own reforming across his face. The other two boys lit up. Of course we do. We got really into underground heroes once we got into middle school. Ms. Joke and a bunch of others, Celeste, Eraserhead, Mr. Brave and Night Eye, even though the last two are Twilight and Intelligence heroes and not undergrounders, Asano chuckled. Kiriko nodded delightedly. We realized that I'm best suited to underground heroics, seeing as my abilities are literally shapeshifting. Asano wants to go into Twilight heroics, not underground, but not completely a limelight hero either. His quirk's perfect for intelligence, I guess, but stuff like assassinations and infiltration the most, Kiriko replied happily. Izuku found himself smiling again. I'm going into underground heroics, along with my friends. We're going to form our own underground agency. I'll be our leader, analyst and one of the patrollers. My sister Kyoka's going to be our reconnaissance hero. Her boyfriend Hitoshi's going to be our main patroller and filter through jobs, and my boyfriend Nito's going to be our infiltration and extraction expert. His copy quirk is perfect for the job, and his eccentric personality, he grinned, pausing at the looks he was being given from his new friends.
Is there something wrong, guys? He chuckled hesitantly, his smile faltering. No, it's just, boyfriend. You have a boyfriend? Asano asked him, his smile fading awkwardly. Yeah, is there something wrong with that? His eyes narrowed and his body tensed. If these guys made fun of NATO, they'd regret it, but to his surprise, the pair relaxed and breathed a sigh of relief instead. It made Izuku slow to a standstill. Thank goodness, I can't believe we're in the same boat, Asano smiled, relieved. We're never sure how to tell people, we'll never know how they'll react, so we just never tell them, Kiriko shrugged, grinning at a thoroughly confused Izuku. It all cleared up after he saw the two holding hands and hiding blushes behind straight faces.
So you're both gay and dating. Sure, keep that a secret, please. Not many people accept relationships like ours. Asano tilted his head to the side and raised a hand, smiling. Izuku matched the smile with one of his own, a genuine one shown only to his family and friends.
There was a lot about Asano and Kiriko that had changed over the years, but that was a given, considering Izuku hadn't seen them in about 10 years.
He was shocked he even remembered them clearly enough to recognize them on sight. Izuku chuckled to himself for a moment, thinking back on when they were all just kids.
The two boys were adorable, back then, but something bugged him and he couldn't help but ask the question on his mind.
Hey, why did you hang out with Marana anyway? You had to have known she wasn't the greatest friend to pick, Izuku inquired curiously. The two boys glanced at each other, shrugged and sighed, grinning knowingly at Izuku, who stared back, puzzled.
Izuku, only you would have known something like that. We were 5, Asano sighed patiently. We were young and she was pretty. She was the only girl who really paid attention to us and everyone else avoided us because our quirks were almost as strong as Bakugo's. Kiriko shrugged blankly, his lips pursed in thought.
All right, Bakugo, have you heard from him recently? Izuku asked and the other two boys went to answer, when a loud bell rang through the halls. A grin began to spread over his face. How much do you want to bet the written exams are over and lunch breaks beginning? Asano couldn't help but smile as wide as Izuku was. You know that's a no deal, Itsu. Kiriko rolled his eyes fondly. Further off in the halls Izuku could hear doors opening and footsteps marching towards the cafeteria, eager for some food before the next part of Ketsubutsu's exam. We should probably grab some food before the commotion reaches the cafeteria and we're stuck in a long line, Izuku advised, getting to his feet with a smile. Asano and Kiriko followed him to the counter with smiles on their faces, ordering quickly and retrieving their food just as the doors to the cafeteria burst open and dozens of kids flooded the wide open space. There weren't as many people as there had been for UA's exam, Izuku noted, but Ketsubutsu was a smaller school, known more for its Twilight and Underground heroes than its Spotlighters. Of course, the school did have its fair share of Spotlight hero graduates,
but it had always been known as the school that catered towards invisible and non-combatant quirks.
As they ate, Izuku regarded his friends curiously. "Do you know what we'll have to do for the practical?" he asked. They glanced at each other.
"You don't know? It's all online and easy to search up," Asano replied, slightly confused.
"Is it something to do with your mom being a teacher here?" Kiriko glanced up from his food. Izuku shrugged sheepishly. It was a point he really didn't want to argue with his mother about. It really wasn't worth the headache, so he didn't.
"Yeah, I know it's kind of useless, since the basic information is on Ketsubutsu's website, but never let it be said Ms. Joke is not a stubborn mule when she wants something." Izuku rolled his eyes with fond exasperation. Asano giggled as Kiriko nodded sagely. "My mom's the same way, and Itsumi's. I think that's just how all women are," he explained, waving his chopsticks in the air.
"I guess. So, what do you think's going to happen?" Izuku persisted with his question.
"The practicals split into two parts, combat and stealth. For the combat proportion, we get 2 chances, unarmed focused, quirks forbidden and quirks allowed.
We have a choice of fighting each other or an examiner. Then those who don't pass that get another shot in the stealth exercise. All we have to do is make it from one side of a fake city to the other undetected by the examiners. Your score depends on how far you make it across the city and how well thought out your route was. It's a pretty good exam all things considered. Thank goodness it's nothing crazy like UA's ridiculous exam," Asano explained nonchalantly. Izuku whistled.
"That's actually a little complicated. How long is this going to take?" "Honestly, not as long as you'd think," Kiriko grinned. "Honestly, not as long as you'd think," Kiriko grinned. "I'll take you at your word," Izuku nodded, stuffing his mouth with katsudon. The hour passed quickly, thankfully, and soon all the examinees were shuffled off to an auditorium not unlike the one Izuku saw at UA. They had all taken a seat, when an explosion burst from the floor of the stage and confetti layered them all. "Greetings to you all, lovely examinees. The sun is shining and it's a perfect day to be pushed to your limits by sadistic teachers," Ms. Joke cried, bungee jumping from the upper rungs of the stage. Izuku wasn't the only one staring, but he certainly was one of the only ones cracking up at his mother's antics. Asano and Kiriko looked at Izuku, then to a widely grinning Ms. Joke and back to Izuku, unsure how to react. What kind of influence have you been living under?" They stared at him incredulously. Izuku grinned at them, but didn't give them a reply as chuckles started rising up around the auditorium with alarming speed. He should have known his mom would pull a stupid joke like this. "I live with Ms. Joke, guys, I think you forgot that. Alright, examinees. Welcome to the Ketsubutsu Heroics course exams that are going to have you bellyaching with laughter. Here's what's going down. You kids will be deposited at the entrance of 4 different fake cities. Your task will be to make your way from where you are to the other side of the city without being caught by the teachers monitoring your city. If you are caught before the halfway mark, you will be eliminated and will not be continuing the exam. The time limit is 15 minutes. Return here for your next instructions once you have completed this first part of your exam," Ms. Joke explained, pointing behind her to a giant projector screen, helpfully aiding her in her explanation. With funny cartoons that were not actually very helpful. Ms. Joke style. "Izuku?" Asano couldn't help but stare. "I know," Izuku sighed, shaking his head. It was funny, but was now really the time? "I wonder how you're still sane after living with her for almost 5 years, Kiriko added thoughtfully. Izuku shrugged, watching Ms. Joke continue giving out instructions. "You all received ID cards, yes? Those IDs provide you the location of your exam sites, so get moving, clock's ticking," she grinned. Izuku jumped up, Asano and Kiriko right behind him. "Come on. If we don't get moving, we might miss the start of the exam," he murmured quietly, slipping out of the auditorium with the 2 boys right on his heels as the other examinees milled about in confusion. The 3 of them ran out of the hall, down a flight of stairs and outside onto a field where they paused momentarily. Izuku checked his card and Asano and Kiriko checked theirs. More staring ensued. "Please don't tell me I'm actually seeing what I'm seeing," Kiriko groaned, a smile forming on his face. Asano couldn't answer him, too shocked to talk. "Heroes do have to be prepared for every opportunity," Izuku said weakly. Izuku, a teamwork exercise and a scavenger hunt all before a stealth exercise? Asano deadpanned at him with a raised eyebrow. It could happen. When? When will this possibly ever happen again, Izuku? Answer me that. Kiriko rolled his eyes. Izuku glanced down at his ID card and sighed. You're right, someone's just having some fun with us. What do we have to find? He eyed his card, examining it closely. Along with his name and ID number, the card held a small map of the school, 2 portrait pictures and a short list of things he had to find along with a set of instructions. Ketsubutsu wasn't as big as UA, so buses weren't necessary, but to have kids who'd never been here before, much less never studied maps before, locate the 2 separate people shown on their ID cards and find, collectively as there was 1 item per person, 3 different items before making their way to the cities? That was overkill. What was completely unnecessary was the fact that Izuku's teammates were Asano and Kiriko respectively. They were also each other's scavenger items, complete and utter overkill. Mom's idea, I'll bet. Come on, let's get this over with. Izuku let out a breath of resignation and held out a hand. Kiriko took it. Asano took Izuku's other hand and together they made their way towards their exam site. Yes, they were all at the same exam site. Coincidence? I think not. Revenge is sweet, isn't it? Don't worry, evil narrator, I'll get you back for this, Izuku muttered under his breath. Asano and Kiriko glanced at him oddly, but didn't say anything. Izuku led the way as he was in the middle, following the map on his ID card closely. Naturally, they were the first to arrive at their city, but their examiners just so happened to be Kazuya, Kisei and a few other not well-known teachers. They certainly had a hell of a time laughing at Izuku and his 2 friends, but they marked them off the list sure enough. They were told they weren't to let go of each other, however, and wasn't that a blow to their pride as men? It wasn't like they were going to be laughed at by the examinees also in their test site, not when they were carrying things like giant yellow rubber ducks, a bright Hawaiian shirt, which Izuku would forever be questioning where the hell that particular examinee found it, a full-on baby pram and a family of plastic dogs. It was a very embarrassed and less energetic group of teenagers that had gathered at the test site, all of them praying this nightmare would end soon. Izuku in particular was, currently, devising plan after plan to get back at his beloved and beloathed mother for this stunt. The examiners, hero teachers employed by Ketsubutsu, gathered at the front and called the crowd's attention. Took you long enough. Now, you all know what you have to do, but there is a catch. This exam must be completed in the trios you arrived here in and with the items you collected. There has been a line drawn through the middle of this city. If you pass it without being caught, but do not have your trio or item, it is an immediate disqualification and you will not be continuing on with the exam. Your score, whether you pass or fail, depends on how far you get through the city. If you do not cross the barrier, but are close enough, as long as you have your teammates and item you will still have an opportunity to continue with the exam. Any questions? Kazuya grunted out. There was a general chorus of no's and no sirs when Izuku, still holding onto Kiriko's and Asano's hands, lifted his own and Kiriko's hands in the air. For those of us who are, he took a deep breath in, slightly occupied with their items, will we be granted time to strategize? He asked sensibly. A few snickers wafted around the room, but a quick glare from Asano and Kiriko silenced them. Izuku wasn't asking just for his team's benefit. He doubted the team with the baby pram and set of plastic dogs were getting far without time to plan and think out a route through the city. Kagaya smirked slyly. Nice catch, kid. Yeah, you all get 15 minutes to plan, then 15 minutes for the exam. Thank you very much, sir. Izuku lowered his hand. The groups branched off, each of them finding a place to sit down and talk in whispers, hurriedly trying to strategize. Izuku, Asano and Kiriko were no exception, except, given the amount of time they had, there was no need to rush. What's the plan, guys? Any ideas? Asano whispered as they all crouched down. Synchronization is key here, since we need to be holding hands. A chain will be sufficient. They didn't penalize or disqualify us for you two not directly touching each other. It'll be like a 3-person 3-legged race, Izuku explained. Kiriko frowned. You'll have to lead the way, Izuku. Give us cues as we go. Asano and I will keep a lookout for the teachers, so you make sure we're making the best moves at the right times. Keep us safe. I got it. Timing is everything. We'll have to plan our route as we go. I'm not sure we'll be able to see anything from the start point. Over or under? Izuku glanced at his teammates. I'd love to say over, but would you be able to, see, jumping over rooftops? Asano asked Izuku awkwardly. Izuku smiled reassuringly at him. Don't worry, my quirk connects me directly to Flora. There may not be much around a city as fake as this one, but it should have a few. I'll be fine. Speaking of quirks, Kiriko, will yours be of any use? Kirito hummed at the question. In a pinch, sure, but I can only hold human transformations for 15 seconds, and that's only on myself. I don't know what the effects are on other people, he explained apologetically. Don't worry about it, we'll handle things if you can't. Papercraft should certainly be of some help, right Asano? Izuku directed a gaze at the other boy. Asano grinned and fished out a handful of paper from his pocket. I'm always prepared, Izuku. Not to your extent, but enough. I still can't believe they're making us do this, Kiriko groaned. Izuku shrugged impassively. When you grew up with a mother who did ridiculous things on an almost hourly basis, you got used to things fast. In Izuku's opinion, this was just Emi messing with him and his friends. Ketsubutsu was known as a school for the more creative heroes for a reason. I think that's part of the reason why they're doing this. It's a test in and of itself, Izuku said quietly. The other two glanced at him, confused, and he elaborated. As heroes, we're going to be put in uncomfortable and ridiculous situations all the time, and we'll need to work efficiently and smartly through it, regardless of the circumstances. If we falter just because we think we look silly, or the task is dumb or not suited to our hero personas, we wouldn't be worth calling heroes. Asano and Kiriko shared a sheepish look. I guess, but we don't have to like it, Asano told him, making a face. Izuku snorted. I don't like it either, but we've got to beep it up. At least we won't have the hardest time, as long as we communicate properly. He gestured around them at the other groups, and recognition dawned on his teammates. How was one supposed to maneuver a cityscape without being caught by professional heroes and stick with a team with a baby pram? For that matter, what about the boy with dolls, or the girl with the plastic puppies? All they were doing was holding hands. They were lucky the examiners allowed them a loophole, since Asano and Kirito were still technically connected using Izuku as a sort of conduit. Other teams weren't that lucky, so they took a breath and steeled themselves, determination filling their eyes. Let's do this, they chorused. Izuku grinned like a madman, channeling as much Aizawa into it as he could, and to their credit, Asano and Kiriko did a good job of not flinching away. We'll be fine, guys, just try to keep up, he smirked. Is that a challenge? Asano lit up as Kiriko rolled his eyes. Izuku went to respond, when an alarm blared through the quiet murmurs and everyone fell silent. In their haste to strategize, no one had noticed the examiners disappear into the city, Izuku cursing his distraction. The city's cement walls had opened up, and he, Asano and Kiriko didn't hesitate, charging headlong into the city and taking cover almost immediately in the shadows of a dark alleyway. It took the other examinees a second to realize their time had already begun, and in their panic surged forwards into the city. Izuku's group shoved everyone else out of their heads, focusing instead on their path forward. Izuku thanked whoever made the layout of the city for at least trying to make it realistic, scouting ahead being a whole lot easier when he could draw on the earth someone had filled the sidewalks in with. He had the layout of the city immediately, and in a quiet whisper relayed the information to Asano and Kiriko. Their steps were as silent as they could make them, and their progress was slow, but they covered more ground than some teams who hadn't even passed a quarter of the city before getting caught. It was as they planned, Izuku scouting ahead while the other two focused on getting them through the city, scanning for danger both ahead and above, since Izuku's quirk didn't give him a realistic image of the sky. They worked well together, ducking and weaving in absolute silence, only speaking if it was absolutely necessary. There was no better way of getting caught than needless talking. They used the cover of any shadow they could find in the alleys, using them to their best advantage. The main streets were often the most direct routes, but they would also be the routes the examiners were watching closest, which meant that, while a lot more challenging to get through and less direct, taking up more time on their final score, the alleys were less guarded and gave them the best chance of passing the midline. That wasn't to say they were completely safe to pass through. Asano caught sight of heroes passing overhead, over the buildings and rooftops more than once, and it was thanks to his papercraft and the shadows of the alley that allowed them to pass the danger unscathed. With Izuku and Asano scouting, it fell to Kiriko to keep them moving, sharp and together on the count. At all times, they had to be hanging onto some part of their item, and with each other being their item, the loophole was their biggest asset. Keeping all three of them on time and in sync was harder than it looked, and it was only thanks in enormous part to Kiriko that they managed to stay together. Each of them had their own focal point, and their strategy, communication and trust in each other was what led to them being the first team to pass the midline and keep going quite a fair distance through the city before an examiner caught them. It was still rather funny when Izuku decided they weren't caught until the examiner physically touched or apprehended them, and it led to a full-scale chase through the rest of the city. The three of them had gotten good at the five-legged race thing and managed to avoid the examiner right up until the timer sounded. He was glaring daggers at the three of them as they laughed their heads off, Izuku cackling in particular glee as it had been his idea. Well, needless to say, they passed the first part of the exam. Everyone who passed, at least half of the examinees, were led back to the auditorium to receive their next instructions for the second half of their exam. The one-on-ones were interesting, especially since they were informed they could choose out of a list given to them which hero teacher they were to fight. Izuku was surprised to find his mother on his list, as well as Kagaya and Kisei and a few other hero teachers. He ended up picking Kisei, not wanting to fight the bear that was Kagaya and already fed up with Emi's fighting style. He had to ignore the mock hurt and pouting expression Emi shot at him as the examiners received the results, but that switched to glee as she realized just how many examinees actually picked her. Izuku smirked to himself. They didn't know Emi, therefore she was either a mid-ranked hero with a weak quirk or a new, green hero in their eyes. No one who chose her knew that she was a pro that had been working for more than 10 years and was a lot more skilled than she ever let on. It was a part of her persona, and she played it up as often as she could so foes and enemies would underestimate her. It worked, apparently, and Izuku was pleased for her. The heroes they'd be fighting lined the stage, each one grinning and excited to get a shot at their potential students. "Who'd you pick?" Kiriko murmured to Izuku quietly. "Kisei, hero name. Shotbolt. I've met him before, and they're students, but I didn't know he was Shotbolt until now," he muttered back. "I chose Ms. Joke." Asano leaned in, joining the conversation. Izuku raised his eyebrows. "Why, for the love of all things peaceful, did you do that for?" He couldn't keep the flat judgment out of his voice, and his friends could tell. Asano sniggered as he explained. "I figured I'd get a good reaction out of you, for once, and I want to test my quirk under stress. She's not known as the smile hero for nothing. She fights with weighted rubber animals, Itsumi. Weighted rubber animals. Some of them squeak." Izuku mustered as much deadpan into his voice as he could to get the point across. Asano just grinned at him, with no regret at all on his face. "If it's any consolation, I chose Kisei too. He's one of my favorite Twilight heroes," Kiriko admitted with a smile. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief, thankful he'd have at least one of them with him before Asano stilled, grinning stupidly. "Izuku, you called me Itsumi." "What?" Izuku stared at him, shock stamped across his face. "You called me by my first name, Itsumi," he repeated, and Izuku's face flushed red. Asano and Kiriko took a step back in surprise, not expecting that reaction. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, I just got caught up with Mom, and..." "Who said I'm mad? From now on, you're only allowed to call me Itsumi," he decided firmly. "Wait, no Asano," Izuku began, but Asano cut him off. "No, what did I say? You're not allowed to call me Asano anymore, it's Itsumi." "Then I'm Kamiho." "Itsu's not the only one getting called by his first name," Kiriko interjected heatedly. Izuku gave up trying to change their minds with a huff, hiding his pleased smile. The glow he felt didn't diminish even as they parted ways to follow their chosen examiners. His bullies were now his friends, and they wanted him to call them by their first names. Izuku was on cloud 9. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.